Subject of ratings has been a talking point of Doctor Who ever since it started back in 1963. Across the show's 50-year-plus history, fans and critics alike have looked to television ratings to judge in some manner how well our favourite science fiction show is doing with the public. Now, the importance and structure of the rating system here in the UK has changed dramatically over the past 50 years, and the competition amongst television channels has grown vastly. Nevertheless, even with the most recent series, we once again use television ratings as some sort of weapon in the never-ending battleground of fan debate. I myself have always been fascinated with stats and numbers, and ever since I became a Whovian, that fascination only intensified. To see numbers rise and fall hugely with this show is so interesting. After watching Josh Snares' documentary on missing episodes a bajillion times, and seeing the information and how passionate he was about the subject, I decided to try and create a series of my own, to show my passion and interest for the rating side of things. So I present to you this series, where we will look through the ratings of each season of Doctor Who and the stories within them. It's going to be a long journey, but we're going to begin, and we will get there.
The long way round.
The year is 1963. Spider-Man is beginning to make his mark in the comic book world, the Beatles were beginning their dominance on the pop charts, and on the 22nd of November, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. The very next day, at 5:16 p.m. on BBC TV, a brand new science fiction show began. This was, of course, Doctor Who. The first story was An Unearthly Child, alternatively known as 100,000 BC. Two school teachers, concerned with the performance and behaviour of one of their students, follow her to her home in a junkyard. There they meet a crotchety old man known as the Doctor, stumble inside a police box that's bigger on the inside, and things will never be the same again. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 23rd of November 1963 and concluded on the 14th of December. The 4 individual episodes were titled as An Unearthly Child, The Cave of Skulls, The Forest of Fear, and The Firemaker. Here we can see how many viewers tuned in across the 4 episodes. Notice how episode 1 has a notably low audience of 4.4 million. That may sound like a lot, but back in 1963, this wouldn't have necessarily been seen as exceptional. However, the assassination of Kennedy the previous day really began to dominate news headlines and TV schedules throughout the UK on the day of the 23rd. So by the time Doctor Who humbly appeared at 5:15, people may have been watching programmes on the BBC's rival, ITV, or been so drained by TV coverage of the President's death that they just decided to switch off. As a consolidation, the BBC repeated An Unearthly Child the following week, directly before episode 2, which attracted a healthy 6 million viewers. And this figure would roughly continue throughout the rest of the story's run, rising and falling slightly each week. This story has often been praised for its first episode, and then having the remaining 3 being forgotten about. Is the very first episode the most intriguing and interesting? Oh god, yes. It introduces us to the Doctor, the TARDIS, and this endless world of possibilities. And sure, the other 3 episodes are fine, but in terms of mystery and intrigue, they don't hold a candle to episode 1 in my opinion. Overall, the story attracted an average of 5.9 million viewers. Not bad for the start of a brand new show. Based on other figures we have, when An Unearthly Child was repeated in 1981 as part of the 5 Faces of Doctor Who season on BBC Two, it garnered an average of 4.3 million viewers. The pilot episode, which was the first recording of the first episode, never originally broadcast, was eventually given a TV airing on the 26th of August 1991, where it attracted 1.6 million viewers.
Yes, ship. This doesn't roll along like wheels, you know.
You mean it moved?
The second story of Season 1 is the Daleks, alternatively known as the Mutants or the Dead Planet. The TARDIS team arrive on the planet Skaro, seemingly a barren, dead planet. When they explore a gleaming city, however, they meet the most feared creatures in the universe, the Daleks. This story was comprised of 7 episodes, which began airing on the 21st of December 1963 and concluded on the 1st of February 1964. The 7 individual episodes were titled The Dead Planet, The Survivors, The Escape, The Aftermath, The Expedition, The Ordeal, and The Rescue. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 7 episodes, starting with a modest 6.9 million before climbing to over 10 million viewers by episodes 6 and 7. We noticed the big jump between episodes 2 and 3, where there is a jump upwards of 2.5 million viewers. I think we could put this down to the Daleks themselves. In episode 1, we only see part of a Dalek at the very end. In episode 2, we see the Daleks for the first time, and I'm sure the buzz around the school playgrounds and the coverage in the press got all those extra people to sit down and tune in the following week. Either that or people were still recovering from New Year's celebrations, you take your pick. This story, despite being 7 parts, is so exciting and very rarely gets boring. The Daleks are just as fascinating and threatening after over 55 years, a testament to their writing by Terry Nation, their design by Raymond Cusick, and the voices created by the legendary Peter Hawkins. Overall, the story attracted an average of 8.9 million viewers, a 3 million increase on the previous story's average. In terms of repeats, we have the figures from Doctor Who Night, which was broadcast in 1999. In this special evening, an edited version of Episode 7, which contained elements of Episode 6, was shown and attracted an audience of 1.6 million.
You will move ahead of us and follow my directions. This way.
The third story of Season 1 is The Edge of Destruction, alternatively known as Inside the Spaceship. After leaving Skaro, the TARDIS team experiences some huge issues with the ship, and a nightmare begins to ensue in what is in many ways their home. This story is comprised of 2 episodes, airing on the 8th and 15th of February 1964. The 2 individual episodes were titled as The Edge of Destruction and The Brink of Disaster. Here are the individual viewing figures for both episodes, the first continuing that high from the Daleks at 10.4 million, before dropping to 9.9 million the following week. Still very impressive by 1964 standards. It was always going to be tough to follow the Daleks, and with a 2-part adventure set inside the TARDIS with only the main cast, it could be a hard sell to some. However, I find this story really interesting and gripping, and I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't already. The fact it hovers above or below 10 million is a testament to just how much Doctor Who's popularity exploded during 1964. Overall, the story attracted an average of 10.15 million, which is still a substantial increase from the Daleks, but remember, for the Daleks we had to average out across 7 episodes, whereas here we only have to do so with 2.
A new birth of a sun and its planets.
The fourth story of Season 1 is Marco Polo. Following the TARDIS's landing on the roof of the world, the TARDIS team begin a long journey, one which may have devastating consequences. This story is comprised of 7 episodes, which began airing on the 22nd of February 1964 and concluded on the 4th of April. The 7 individual episodes were titled as The Roof of the World, The Singing Sands, 500 Eyes, The Wall of Lies, Rider from Shang-Tu, Mighty Kublai Khan, and Assassin at Peking. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 7 episodes. We can see that the figures hold really steady across the 7 weeks, peaking with the final part at 10.4 million viewers. This story sadly no longer exists in the BBC archive, with all 7 episodes considered lost. We do have audio recordings though, which you can still listen to through various releases. And when we get to missing episodes, I won't do too much blabbering. As mentioned, Josh has already made a great documentary on these missing stories, so I highly recommend you check that out for more information. Overall, the story attracted an average of 9.4 million, an impressive number considering this was a 7-part story, and as this is considered a lost story, there have been no repeats of Marco Polo in the UK. It can still, however, be enjoyed as a novelisation and as an audio drama. The 5th story of Season 1 is The Keys of Marinus. On Marinus, the TARDIS crew hunt for 4 keys to a strange machine that will overcome the hideous Vords. This story was comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 11th of April 1964 and concluded on the 16th of May. The 6 individual episodes were titled as The Sea of Death, The Velvet Web, The Screaming Jungle, The Snows of Terror, Sentence of Death, and The Keys of Marinus. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes, starting strong at 9.9 million, but by the story's end we have dropped over 3 million viewers to 6.9 million. As we can see, the drop seems to occur between episodes 4 and 5, going from 10.4 to 7.9 million, a loss of 2.5 million viewers. It could just be viewers were tired of hoping that the Daleks would return, as that was the main reason for the show's initial big boost, or perhaps viewers didn't connect with this particular story as much. Also, as we head towards summer of 1964, and evenings are generally hotter and brighter, more audiences may have been out and about rather than inside watching television. Although, the reason might be a bit more simple than that. The first 4 parts of this story were airing at a 5:30 PM time slot. However, with episodes 5 and 6, this was moved back to Doctor Who's original time slot of 5:15. And it seems oddly that move for 15 minutes earlier was partly the reason it cost them over 2 million viewers. It was still sandwiched between the shows The Telegoons and Jukebox Jury, And with episode 6 that week, Jukebox Jury wasn't on the air, instead being replaced by a film, Where Coco Lives, which was all about the life of Coco the Clown. Even though not looked on as a masterpiece today, many forget that The Keys of Marinus was written by Dalek creator Terry Nation, one of his rare non-Dalek scripts for the show. Overall, the story attracted an average of 9 million viewers, a slight decrease on the previous story's average. If you're a fan of Terry Nation's work, I suggest giving this one a rewatch.
Barbara, what's got into you?
Why can't you see?
This is going to test our host's patience, you know. It's one of a set.
The sixth story of Season 1 is the Aztecs. The time travelers enjoy a more historical trip as they arrive in 15th century Mexico. However, trouble begins to ensue as Barbara is mistaken for a god. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 23rd of May 1964, concluding on the 13th of June. The 4 individual episodes were titled as The Temple of Evil, The Warriors of Death, The Bride of Sacrifice, and The Day of Darkness. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes. We can see that the story maintains a healthy audience within the 7 million range, peaking in episode 3 at 7.9 million. This story, although more of a pure historical affair, is notable and remembered for several key reasons, namely how it shows us the first real time the Doctor gives a speech to one of his companions about how they cannot interfere with the events of history. Not one line. Even though this is something he does himself on numerous occasions, within reason of course.
But you can't rewrite history. Not one line.
It also shows us the Doctor's first vaguely romantic encounter. Nothing too serious, but the show wouldn't play on this again until decades later. Overall, the story attracted an average of 7.5 million viewers, a noticeable 1.5 million drop from the Keys of Marinus' average. Nevertheless, 7.5 million back in 1964 would have still been viewed as a success, and with the exploding popularity of both the show and the Daleks in particular, it's not like it was going to be taken off the air anytime soon.
Where did you get hold of this?
My fiancée.
I see. You're what?
The 7th and penultimate story of Season 1 is the Sensorites. Arriving in the 28th century, the TARDIS team meet a space crew who are being terrorized by some very strange telepathic aliens. These are the Sensorites. This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 20th of June 1964 and concluding on the 1st of August. The 6 individual episodes were titled as Strangers in Space, The Unwilling Warriors, Hidden Danger, A Race Against Death, Kidnap, and A Desperate Venture. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes, with ratings jumping all over the place. Starting similar to where the Aztecs left off at 7.9 million, before dropping to a low of 5.5 million for episode 4, and then rising to settle at a decent 6.9 million by episode 6. It's interesting to note that this story wasn't broadcast over 6 consecutive Saturdays. Episode 3 was meant to air on the 4th of July 1964, but was pushed back to the following week, the 11th of July. This was due to extended coverage of the Wimbledon Tennis Championship and the Ashes Test match, although it's noted that the BBC were originally going to screen episode 3 as planned on the 4th, albeit 2 hours later than its normal time slot, but it eventually was replaced by another Saturday stalwart, Jukebox Jury. This story is interesting for a few reasons. Despite arguably being a bit too long, we get to see a bit more of Susan's telepathic powers, something which sadly doesn't really get revisited again. Furthermore, this is writer Peter R. Newman's only contribution to Doctor Who, and I highly recommend checking out the documentary on him on the DVD release of The Sensorites, if you wish to learn more about this elusive figure. Overall, the story attracted an average of 6.9 million, continuing the drop seen in the Aztecs previously. Whilst The Sensorites may not be the most talked about story from Season 1, I think the performances are top notch, and is still enjoyable to some degree. And again, keep in mind as the story broadcast over June, July and into August, British summer would have been in full swing. I know I would have still been playing out at 5:15 PM.
Which one is the Doctor? The one with the white hair.
The 8th and final story from Season 1 is the Reign of Terror. The TARDIS lands in 1794 Paris in the midst of the infamous Reign of Terror. Can they navigate this dark period of history without changing events and, more importantly, getting themselves out alive? This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 8th of August 1964 and concluded on the 12th of September. The 6 individual episodes were titled as A Land of Fear, Guests of Madame Guillotine, A Change of Identity, The Tyrant of France, A Bargain of Necessity, and Prisoners of Conciergerie. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes, and we can see that they are fairly consistent throughout the story, either striking at 6.9 or 6.4 million viewers. Another historical outing for this story, The Reign of Terror sadly is missing 2 parts, episodes 4 and 5. However, these missing episodes were animated for the story's DVD release in January of 2013. Concluding on the 12th of September, this story ended Doctor Who's first season, which ran for almost 10 months, which by today's standards is insane. But certainly by The Reign of Terror's end, Doctor Who had firmly seated itself in the homes of millions across the UK, so the possibility of a second season was all but assured. Overall, the story attracted an average of 6.7 million viewers, another slight drop from the previous story, but nothing that would have been considered as too alarming back in 1964. By this point, there was a new third TV channel in the UK, BBC Two, which launched in April of 1964, but I don't think this has much to do with the viewership drop. Once again, summertime in Britain is a powerful thing, and most people attribute ratings drops across all programmes in the summer down to this factor.
Our destiny is in the stars, so let's go and search for it.
So that's Season 1, the 8 stories that comprise it and the ratings that they garnered. So let's have a look at the story averages for this season. We can see the highs and lows from this inaugural year, with the story with the most average ratings technically being The Edge of Destruction with 10.15 million. However, as mentioned before, for one, it's the shortest story to average with only 2 episodes, and secondly, it was the story following the Daleks, which contributed to a huge audience rise during that story, which undoubtedly bled a little bit into this one too. The big drop in the series comes after the Keys of Marinus, dropping from 9 to 7.5 million with the Aztecs, and gradually declining from there. Though again, I think a lot of this is just viewers staying out in the sun as British summertime kicked in. If we work out the average amount of viewers across the entire season, we can calculate that the average for Season 1 of Doctor Who is around 8.05 million viewers. Not bad for a new show's debut year, particularly one that many considered to be a children's programme, even though it was made by the drama department. The year is 1964. BBC Two launched in April, providing a third TV channel for UK viewers. The Summer Olympics took place in Tokyo, Japan, and Beatlemania was beginning to hit fever pitch with fans across the whole country. Another mania would hit towards the end of the year, but more on that later. In the world of Doctor Who, the show was proving to be a success. Season 1 concluded a 10-month run on the 12th of September, and average ratings across the whole season were around the 8 million mark. But when the show would return a mere 7 weeks later, there was a lot of expectation from both the BBC and from fans. The BBC had been surprised at just how well this little science fiction show aimed primarily at children had taken off, and were keen for the production team to not only replicate, but expand upon this breakout success. From fans, the biggest expectation was to see the Daleks return. From their debut story, which aired towards the beginning of the year, it didn't take long for the minds of children to be obsessed with the Pepperpot creatures. If Doctor Who was to survive its second full season on air, realistically, to match the ridiculous demand, it needed the Daleks. However, Season 2 didn't kick off featuring the popular creatures, instead taking a somewhat smaller direction. The first story of Season 2 is Planet of Giants. Originally thinking they had returned to 60s London, the TARDIS team are horrified to discover they have been miniaturized to roughly the size of an inch. Will they find a way to return to normal and stop a deadly plot at the same time? This story is comprised of 3 episodes, which began airing on the 31st of October 1964 and concluded on the 14th of November. The 3 individual stories were titled as Planet of Giants, Dangerous Journey, and Crisis. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 3 episodes. For the debut story of a new season, Planet of Giants certainly cemented a strong start, maintaining a healthy audience of 8 million throughout, peaking with episode 3, which clocked just under 9 million. This is also a huge jump up from the previous story that closed Season 1, The Reign of Terror, which pulled in around 6 million viewers throughout its 6 episodes. One reason for this strong start could have been that as nights were getting darker and colder, more people would be inside at home ready to tune in to Doctor Who at its 5:15 PM time slot. I find Planet of Giants a great little 3-part adventure to tune into. The giant-sized props are fantastic even now, and the whole thing comes to about 1 hour and 15 minutes, so it's quick and bite-sized, just like our central characters. However, interesting to note is that this was originally going to be a 4-part story, before it was trimmed down to 3. Episodes 3 and 4 were essentially crammed together in order to create a faster pace for the story's conclusion, with arguably mixed results. A recreation of how the original episodes 3 and 4 could have turned out is available to view on the DVD release of this story. Overall, the story attracted an average of around 8.5 million viewers. Again, that's a strong start for Season 2, and despite this story being overlooked by many, I would recommend checking it out again. I promise you it's more engaging than some publications make it out to be. But what was to come next was to ascend Doctor Who ratings to new heights.
Oh, dear, now is that irritating?
The second story from Season 2 is the Dalek invasion of Earth. Arriving in London 200 years into the future, the Doctor and his companions learn that the Daleks have become the masters of Earth, and have an ultimate plan to harness the planet for their deadly conquests. This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 21st of November 1964 and concluded on the 26th of December. The 6 individual episodes were titled as World's End, The Daleks, Day of Reckoning, The End of Tomorrow, The Waking Ally, and Flashpoint. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes, and wow, look at these numbers. All 6 episodes have way over 10 million viewers, with episodes 2 and 6 peaking at 12.4 million. Episodes 2 and 3 also mark the first time that Doctor Who placed within the top 10 programmes ratings-wise, both coming in at 10th place. The other 4 episodes all placed within the top 20. With the start of the Dalek invasion of Earth, Doctor Who was now in a 5:40pm time slot. This, combined with the fact that the story was airing leading up to the Christmas period, I think also helped contribute to an increase in viewership. The final episode went out on Boxing Day 1964, slightly later at 5:55, but also peaked the story's viewership once more at 12.4 million. I mean, what else is Boxing Day for than to eat food and watch telly? This story marked the return of the Daleks, and if you ever doubted their popularity in 1964, well, these ratings help show you just how much attention they carried. To jump from having 8 to at least 11 million viewers between stories, that's a huge achievement for any show, and the Daleks deserve a lot of that thanks. The story itself, I think, is excellent, maintaining a good level of pace and action through all 6 episodes. Some argue that the movie adaptation of this story, titled Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD, is a better telling of this tale, but I think, effects aside, I prefer the TV original. It's also notable for featuring the first TV departure of one of the Doctor's companions, that being his granddaughter, Susan, in what is quite the emotional farewell. Overall, this story attracted an average of 11.9 million viewers, a staggering 3.5 million increase from the previous story's average, and considering this tale is double the length of Planet of Giants, to hold that many viewers represents just how compelling TV drama and Doctor Who itself can be. A bona fide classic, one I highly recommend any Doctor Who fan to experience if they haven't already, whether that's via the TV original, the 1966 movie adaptation, or even the Target novelization and audio.
They dare to tamper with the forces of creation?
Yes, they dare. And we have got to dare to stop them.
The third story from Season 2 is The Rescue. Landing on the planet Dido, the Doctor, Ian, and Barbara meet Vicky, a young survivor from a spaceship crash, who's in fear of the menacing Quillian. This story is comprised of 2 episodes, which began airing on the 2nd of January 1965 and concluded the following week on the 9th of January. The 2 individual episodes were titled as The Powerful Enemy and Desperate Measures. Here are the individual viewing figures for both episodes. Here we see Doctor Who reach a new ratings peak, with episode 2 attracting 13 million viewers. Episode 2 also reached a new peak for Doctor Who in the top 10 programmes, placing 8th, whereas episode 1 narrowly missed the top 10, coming in at 11th. The remarkably high ratings for this 2-part story could be down to a number of factors. The first being that after the huge smash success of the Dalek invasion of Earth, many of new viewers who tuned in decided they wanted to see what further adventures awaited the time-travelling team, thus continuing to watch each Saturday. The story itself comes and goes so quickly, mainly as it's to introduce the new companion Vicky, a somewhat pseudo-replacement for Susan. Quillian is interesting, but I feel had this been a 4-part story, he could have had a little more character development. However, I do adore Maureen O'Brien's performance as Vicky throughout her time on the show, and the other 3 regulars gel well with her. If you want a fast-paced tale in 50 minutes, The Rescue is here for you. Overall, this story attracted an average of 12.5 million viewers, the highest average thus far for both Season 2 and indeed the whole show at this point. It's clear that by the beginning of 1965, Doctor Who was becoming more than just a hit TV show, it was starting to become a household name, where viewers would come back for new adventures every week. And with the introduction of Vicky, the idea that companions could come and go would become an ever-essential part of keeping the show fresh. New year, new TARDIS team, well, let's see where they end up next.
Vicky, are you going to come with us?
Oh, I'd like to.
Yes.
The fourth story of Season 2 is the Romans. In 1st century Rome, the four travellers are forced apart. Ian and Barbara are accosted by slave traders, whilst the Doctor crosses paths with Emperor Nero. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 16th of January 1965 and concluded on the 6th of February. The 4 individual episodes were titled as The Slave Traders, All Roads Lead to Rome, Conspiracy, and Inferno. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes. Here we can see that the current peak of 13 million viewers was hit again by episode 1, which also gave Doctor Who its new highest position on the top 10 at that point, coming in at 7th place. The remaining episodes also impress ratings-wise, however, as they all garnered 10 million or more viewers. A potential reason for episode 3's sharp drop in viewership could be possibly attributed to the state funeral of Sir Winston Churchill, which had aired earlier in the day, a former Prime Minister who had passed away on the 24th of January 1965, at the age of 90. The fact that The Romans was mostly a comedy may not have been what people were in the mood for after such a sombre affair. In that respect, this story was, and in some ways is still unique for Doctor Who, as it serves mostly as a comedic romp through ancient Rome rather than a serious drama. And it's quite a nice break from the norm, though it may jar some fans watching today. Overall, this story attracted an average of 11.6 million viewers, a small decrease from the previous 2 stories, but still a very impressive figure nonetheless. The fact that even a more comedic story from Doctor Who was pulling in such huge numbers, no wonder the BBC was pleased. It's a little different and certainly is more unique compared to most of Hartnell's era, but if you want a bit of fun, The Romans is a good shout.
You want me to play in the arena? You guessed.
The 5th story of Season 2 is the Web Planet. The butterfly-like Menoptera are at war with the ant-like Zarbi on the planet Vortis, and our TARDIS team get caught in the middle, having to choose which side they're on. This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 13th of February 1965, concluding on the 20th of March. The 6 individual episodes were titled as The Web Planet, The Zarbi, Escape to Danger, Crater of Needles, Invasion, and The Centre. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes. We can see that the series has reached another new ratings high, with episode 1 having 13.5 million viewers, also placing 7th in that week's top 10 programmes. Episode 4 managed to crack the top 10 also, coming in at 9th place, and the remaining 4 episodes all cracked the top 20. The fact that the lowest rated episode viewer-wise still had an audience of 12 million honestly is remarkable. The story itself is often seen as a mixed bag. Certainly, the world of Vortis and the alien races of the Menoptera and the Zarbi were quite ambitious for their time, shall we say? Whilst it may look a bit dated and clunky now, there was a lot of emphasis placed into this story, with the production team's hopes that the new monsters would catch on like the Daleks. Sadly, that didn't happen. Imagine if the Zarbi returned. That's a monster reboot we need to see. Some call it a hidden gem, some call it a slow-moving mess, but whichever way you look at it, the Web Planet continued to hold the majority of the audience, staying above 10 million. The alien races seen in the story also had some longevity in the 60s, appearing in some selected Doctor Who merchandise. Overall, this story attracted an average of 12.6 million viewers, a new high for the series, and to be honest, the fact that this technically ambitious tale held the viewers it did over 6 weeks shows that the Web Planet was enjoyed by a great majority of people. As mentioned, today it does look a little dated and wobbly, but try watching it with the eyes of someone who saw this on broadcast in 1965, and just how alien this whole tale must have been.
My ship. My TARDIS.
The 6th story from Season 2 is The Crusade. The time travellers land during the middle of the Holy War between Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, the Saracen ruler. As they watch history unfold, where will they end up falling within all of this? The story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 27th of March 1965 and concluded on the 17th of April. The 4 individual episodes were titled as The Lion, The Knight of Jaffa, The Wheel of Fortune, and The Warlords. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes. We can see audience numbers have taken a major tumble since The Web Planet, with a decrease of 1.5 million from the last episode of that story and the first episode of The Crusade. Ratings dropped by a colossal 2.5 million between episodes 1 and 2, with the remaining 2 episodes hovering in the 9 million margin. Well, why was this fall so drastic? Well, one possible reason is opposition. Aside from BBC Two, the only other channel for viewers to tune into at that time was ITV, the BBC's long-standing rival. At Doctor Who's 5:40pm time slot, in most regions around the country, ITV was showing the variety show Thank Your Lucky Stars, which was hugely popular at the time. Without the advantage of any home recording technology, viewers in 1965 would be forced to pick which programme to watch, knowing they would miss what was on the other side in the process. I have no doubt this contributed to the drop in the Crusade's viewership, but more of a speculative assumption is that perhaps viewers weren't connecting with the more historical stories compared to the more fantastical ones. The Romans faced heavy criticism earlier on in the year, as did the Crusade by the press at the time. The Web Planet received heavy criticism also, but you can't bat away those 12 and 13 million figures. Also, let's face it, Dalek Mania was riding high in 1965, and in the spring, as the Crusade aired, Doctor Who and the Daleks would debut in cinemas to phenomenal success. So I think people stopped watching partly because the Screaming Pepperpots weren't on the small screen as well as the big one. The Crusade itself is a pure historical romp, less comedic than the Romans, but by no means less interesting. It's also the only story in Season 2 to have episodes missing, with episodes 2 and 4 not existing in the BBC archives. The surviving episodes, 1 and 3, are available to view in the Lost in Time DVD box set, or you can listen to the entire story as an audio release. Overall, this story attracted an average of 9.4 million viewers. That's still 1 million higher than the season opener, but it's an over 3 million drop from the previous story. However, despite this decrease, 9.4 million is not to be laughed at. That's still an incredible viewership for 1965, and rivals many of the highest viewed stories in Season 1. Also partially lost today, it is hoped that one of the many animation teams who reconstruct missing episodes will do so with the Crusade and present it for a brand new audience. It certainly deserves a second chance.
It was a fantastic adventure. One of many. One of many. Let me tell you about it.
The seventh story of Season 2 is the Space Museum. The TARDIS jumps a time track and lands on the planet Xeros, before it is supposed to. Our travellers soon learn just how severe the consequences of this will be. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 24th of April 1965 and concluded on the 15th of May. The 4 individual episodes were titled as The Space Museum, The Dimensions of Time, The Search, and The Final Phase. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes. Despite a strong figure of 10.5 million viewers for episode 1, these would drop sharply as the story progressed, finishing at 8.5 million by episode 4. Those figures are still strong on the whole, but like always, there's a few potential reasons that could have contributed to the drop. Episodes 2 and 3 aired slightly later than Doctor Who's then current time slot of 5:40pm. The former due to the coverage of the FA Cup final, and the latter due to coverage of VE Day's 20th anniversary. However, the drop could also be down to viewer reaction to this story, as the Space Museum is quite revered in that regard. Episode 1 of this story was praised by fans both then and now for having a good build and an eerie atmosphere about it. The rest of the story doesn't really follow that mould, and is often criticised for having underdeveloped ideas and a rushed conclusion, and these criticisms were around in the press at the time. So those who tuned into episode 1 and really enjoyed it may have been disappointed with the following episodes, thus not tuning in. However, by this point it had already been confirmed that the Daleks were returning, and just like with the Dalek invasion of Earth beforehand, it was hoped that this new story would bring Doctor Who, and its ratings, back up into stratospheric heights. Overall, this story attracted an average of 9.2 million viewers. This continues the drop experience first with the Crusade, although this new decrease is quite minimal in comparison. Also, a 9.2 million average is still a success, and despite these mounting criticisms of the time that Doctor Who was becoming stale, to still put those kind of numbers in the face of critical opposition is telling of the show's power at this point in time. I don't mind the Space Museum, though I do agree episode 1 is the most interesting part of the story, and probably one of the more unique and fascinating episodes from the entire Hartnell era.
They've gone.
Yes, my dear. And we've arrived.
The 8th and penultimate story of Season 2 is The Chase. The Daleks, now armed with their own time machine, begin to hunt down our travellers through all of time and space, beginning a chase that could have a devastating end. This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 22nd of May 1965 and concluded on the 26th of June. The 6 individual episodes were titled as The Executioners, The Death of Time, Flight Through Eternity, Journey into Terror, The Death of Doctor Who, and The Planet of Decision. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes. We can see the opening episode was at the story's viewership peak at 10 million viewers. However, the rest of the episodes all sit comfortably within the 9 million range. and despite these numbers not being as high as the Dalek invasion of Earth, all 6 episodes still ranked within the top 20 programs for their respective weeks. The final episode in particular touched on the series' then highest position once again, at 7th place. So how can The Chase chart so well despite having considerably less viewers than the Dalek invasion of Earth did 6 months prior? Well, this could mainly be placed down to the changing of the seasons. Dalek Invasion of Earth was a wintertime story, and also around Christmas, where more audiences, particularly families, will be at home and watching television. The Chase, by comparison, is a summertime story, airing through May and June, a time when evenings get lighter and warmer, and more audiences, particularly children in this case, have a greater chance of staying outside rather than being indoors. The Chase itself, I would argue, is a story not to be missed. It's a less serious Dalek adventure, with the Pepperpots coming across all sorts of new threats such as the Mechanoids, Morton Dill, and even Dracula and Frankenstein. It's a very strange story, but one with a lot of fun and intrigue. It introduces the character of Stephen, and provides original series regulars Ian and Barbara with a dignified and poignant exit. Overall, this story attracted an average of 9.4 million viewers, a small increase from the Space Museum's average, most likely attributed to the return of the Daleks, who had also just come off from their successful cinema stint. The Chase may not be as polished as the first 2 Dalek stories, but I would argue that it's still a lot of fun and rarely gets boring. Besides, it's got the Daleks in it, so let's face it, you're gonna watch it if there's Daleks in it.
We made it!
I don't believe it.
London 1965!
Hey, we're 2 years out.
Oh, what's 2 years amongst friends? We're home!
The 9th and final story of Season 2 is The Time Meddler. The Doctor, Vicky and Stephen land in Northumbria in the year 1066. There they meet the Meddling Monk, another member of the Doctor's race who wishes to alter the outcome of the Battle of Hastings. This story is comprised of 4 episodes which began airing on the 3rd of July 1965 and concluded on the 24th of the same month. The 4 individual episodes were titled as The Watcher, The Meddling Monk, A Battle of Wits, and Checkmate. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes. Here we can see the audience numbers fully drop below the 10 million mark for the entire story, with episode 3 actually being the lowest rated episode of the entire season. However, Doctor Who still outdid its competition over on ITV, and also the story was broadcasting through July, the height of British summertime. Less people inside, and let's face it, after The Chase ended, those who were just into the show for the Daleks had probably cottoned on that they wouldn't be seen again for at least a few months, so decided to stop watching. The Time Meddler is notable for the inclusion of the Meddling Monk, a fellow member of the Doctor's race, played by Carry On star Peter Butterworth. I can't imagine how mind-blowing this must have been to watch on transmission in 1965. To learn that the Doctor truly was this alien being and that other members of his species existed too, with their own TARDIS. Also, despite its historical setting, it introduces the elements of science fiction and the notion of history being tampered with, something that would be revisited several times during the show's run. The closing episode of The Time Meddler also concluded Season 2 as a whole, which had a 9-month run in total. Honestly, the thought of Doctor Who being on air for 3/4 of the year today is like a fan's dream come true. Overall, this story attracted an average of 8.4 million viewers, a sharp drop of 1 million from the previous story. However, despite the lack of Daleks and hot summer weather, The Time Meddler ratings-wise is still very much a success. We also have some ratings data from a BBC Two repeat of the story, which aired in January of 1992.
This is BBC Two. Now, if time travel doesn't make you dizzy, we take you back first to 1965, when William Hartnell was in command of the TARDIS, and from there to the Battle of Hastings for another victory for Doctor Who.
During this broadcast, the story gained an average of 2.59 million viewers. Not bad for at that point a 27-year-old story airing on the BBC's secondary channel. And as the time travellers departed 1066, viewers could only speculate as to where they would end up next.
So that's it! You're a time meddler. No wonder you wanted to get rid of me.
Will the Doctor win? Watch Doctor Who.
So that's Season 2, the 9 stories that comprise it, and the ratings that they garnered. So let's have a look at the story averages from this season. The story with the highest average rating is The Web Planet, just, with 12.6 million viewers. The lowest average for this season comes from The Time Meddler, with 8.4 million viewers, slightly below the season opener Planet of Giants. The Web Planet being number 1 here is potentially a mix of high interest after the Dalek invasion of Earth, the extensive promotion the story got, and the intrigue garnered by its alien setting, whereas the lows of The Time Meddler is probably a mix of the summer and no Daleks, as simple as it sounds. It's important to note how monumental an impact the Dalek invasion of Earth had for this entire season. Bringing back the Daleks brought in millions of new viewers, many of whom chose to stick around for months to come. It also helped bring Doctor Who into the top 20 programmes several times throughout the season. If we work out the average amount of viewers across the entire season, we can calculate that the average for Season 2 of Doctor Who is around roughly 10.4 million viewers, nearly a 2.5 million increase on Season 1's average. Late 1964 and the first half of 1965 shows how Doctor Who's success and presence expanded and multiplied with a rapid pace. So by the summer of 1965, those industry bigwigs and press reviewers could hardly dispute the appeal, success, and power that Doctor Who held over the British public. It's the summer of 1965. Children are enjoying the 6-week break from school, and for the past 9 months they and their families had been enjoying in their millions the second season of the BBC's now well-known science fiction show, Doctor Who. We learned that Season 2 attained a season average rating of around 10.4 million viewers, which, considering the season was spread out across 9 months, that's a remarkable achievement. The peak of this success was the very first episode of The Web Planet, which drew in 13.5 million viewers. The 6-part adventure in full also carried the highest story average for the season, which was an insane 12.6 million. So with Doctor Who set to return in early September of 1965, what could audiences expect a third time around? And more importantly, in the BBC's eyes, could their little science fiction show strike it big once more? Or would it start to wear a little bit thin? The first story of Season 3 is Galaxy 4. On a slowly disintegrating planet, the Doctor, Stephen, and Vicky encounter the all-female Dravin race, who are at conflict with the malformed Rills and their robot servants, the Chumbleys. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 11th of September 1965 and concluded on the 2nd of October. The 4 individual episodes were titled as 400 Dawns, Trap of Steel, Airlock, and The Exploding Planet. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and it's clear to see that out of the 3 full Hartnell seasons, this opener has the strongest start, garnering at least 9 million viewers for each episode, with episode 3 peaking at an impressive 11.3 million viewers. Audiences were clearly ready and waiting for Doctor Who to return, despite only being off air for 7 weeks. The robotic Chumbleys were yet another attempt from the Doctor Who team to introduce a creature to rival the popularity of the Daleks, and their absence from the TV since this story proves just how well that went. Galaxy 4 as a story is often seen as a little lackluster, but we only have audios to primarily go on, as all episodes, bar episode 3, are currently lost. A long segment of episode 1 does exist, as well as various small clips here and there. But if you want the full Galaxy 4 experience, you can either check out the Target novelization, or listen to the full audio version. Though from my own take, and from a fair chunk of fans, if you pass on this one, I don't think you're missing a great deal. Overall, this story attracted an average of 9.9 million viewers. This is a higher average than both the openers for the previous 2 seasons, further strengthening Doctor Who's position as a regular TV programme for families to sit down and watch. With just under 10 million viewers for the show's return, the BBC must have been pleased. Their fears that audiences would lose interest in the show were unfounded. At least for now. The second story of Season 3 is Mission to the Unknown. Space security agent Mark Corey discovers the Daleks are scheming their deadliest plot yet, of unspeakable scale and destruction. He records a warning message for Earth, but will he live to see it delivered? This story is comprised of just 1 episode, which aired on the 9th of October 1965. The individual episode was titled as, you guessed it, Mission to the Unknown. Here are the viewing figures for that standalone episode, clocking in at 8.3 million. This is still a respectable figure, but surprising considering it was a Dalek-centric episode. Compared to the Dalek invasion of Earth the previous year, the viewing figures were down by nearly 4 million. One obvious factor could be the fact that Dalek mania was starting to wear down, and audiences could have been fatigued. Just think, in 2 years they had appeared on Doctor Who several times, had appeared in a big screen film with a sequel on the way, and had been the face of countless amounts of merchandise. And just like with anything pop culture based, that initial hyperwave of interest will die down. And I would argue by the time of Mission to the Unknown, this was what was starting to happen to the Daleks. Another factor to the lower ratings could also be placed to competition. In some regions, Doctor Who was still airing against the popular ITV variety show Thank Your Lucky Stars, but more of a threat to the show came in the face of expensive American import, Lost in Space. This flashy production went up directly against Doctor Who in some regions, and those viewers could have easily been more curious to check out this new sci-fi show rather than those old Daleks again. Mission to the Unknown itself is quite a strange oddity for classic Who. It's the only standalone episode in the show's original run, and actually doesn't feature any of the regular TARDIS team, including the Doctor himself. The episode is sadly lost, although you can watch a great recreated version of it, organised and performed by members of the University of Central Lancashire. Overall, this story attracted an average of, well, 8.3 million viewers. Easy to average when there's just one episode, eh? Despite being down hugely from previous Dalek serials, and over 1.5 million lower than Galaxy 4's average, Mission to the Unknown would offer viewers a tantalising tease of the epic saga that was to come. The third story of Season 3 is The Mythmakers. Landing the TARDIS in ancient Greece, the Doctor soon realises that he has brought his companions right into the middle of the Trojan War, being at the centre of history once again. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 16th of October 1965 and concluded on the 6th of November. The 4 individual episodes were titled as Temple of Secrets, Small Prophet Quick Return, Death of a Spy, and Horse of Destruction. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes. We can see that viewing figures held steady throughout the story's 4 episodes, all within the 8 million margin. No episode cracked the top 20 programmes for the week, but their ratings are comparable to the previous year's Planet of Giants, which aired around the same time of the year, and gained similar audiences, all in the 8 million range. The Mythmakers is another historical tale, which also saw the departure of Maureen O'Brien's Vicky, albeit to her sudden surprise. But sadly, if historicals are your thing, none of the episodes survive today. Like with most missing stories, you can either read the Target novelization or listen to the audio version. If you're starting to get worried at the sheer amount of missing episodes so far, then believe me, it's gonna get a lot worse. Overall, this story attracted an average of 8.4 million viewers, an ever so slight increase from the previous tale, and despite this being a fun romp through ancient Greece, the time had come. The show's biggest epic was about to commence. The 4th story of Season 3 is the Daleks' Master Plan. The Daleks, along with Marvick Chen, Guardian of the Solar System, are working together to build the ultimate weapon, the Time Destructor. With the assistance of Space Security Agent Brett Vian and later Agent Sarah Kingdom, the Doctor and Steven must use everything they've got to defeat the Daleks once and for all. This story is comprised of 12 episodes, which began airing on the 13th of November 1965 and concluded over 3 months later on the 29th of January 1966. The 12 individual episodes were titled as The Nightmare Begins, Day of Armageddon, Devil's Planet, The Traitors, Counterplot, Coronas of the Sun, The Feast of Stephen, Volcano, Golden Death, Escape Switch, The Abandoned Planet, and The Destruction of Time. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 12 episodes, and damn, this thing held firm. Despite being spread across 3 months, audiences for the most part held consistently, with the peak being episode 3, with around 10.3 million watching, and a low of 7.9 million for the Christmas Day segment, episode 7. One reason for the significantly lower figure here is that around the mid-60s, it was common for viewing figures across all programmes to be down from the norm, as it was less of a Christmas Day custom to gather round and watch the telly as it arguably is now. But to consistently gain 8 or 9 million over 12 weeks, I think it's fair to say that if anyone in the TV industry was dubious, that Doctor Who proved itself here. Sure, the figures weren't as high as they were for the Dalek stories a year earlier, but their popularity still certainly carried some weight with the viewing public. In terms of the story, it's notable for a few reasons. It features the first companion death, with Katerina passing in episode 4, and then the second companion death in Sarah Kingdom, who was devolved into dust in episode 12. This was new and big territory for Doctor Who, as no one in the main cast of regulars had been killed off at that point, and both deaths are quite, shall we say, disturbing to an extent. It also features the first appearance of Nicholas Courtney, who in this tale plays Brett Vian, but would later go on to play the Brigadier from 1968 to 1989. But nevertheless, the Daleks' Master Plan truly is an epic beast to listen to. I say listen as that is the primary way to experience the story these days, either on CD, download, or even on vinyl. There are reconstructions and unofficial animations, which you can still also choose to indulge in, but 3 of the 12 episodes survive, these being episodes 2, 5, and 10, and they can be enjoyed on the Lost in Time DVD box set. For more information on this legendary story, check out Joss's documentary on the making of the Daleks' Master Plan. Overall, this story attracted an average of 9.4 million viewers, a 1 million boost from the Mythmakers. This is probably in part due to the Daleks being back again, the fact this broadcast over the entire winter season, a time when more people are in and watching TV, and maybe because of the sheer scale of it. A 3-month Dalek story on the show was something unique, something that has never been attempted quite in the same way again. It's a real shame 3/4 of the story are lost visually, but I would recommend giving it a listen. It's an adventure that you certainly won't forget.
One Dalek is capable of exterminating all.
The 5th story from Season 3 is The Massacre, alternatively known as the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve. Paris, the late 16th century. The Doctor and Stephen arrive on the eve of the Catholic plans to murder as many French Protestants as possible. Even more horrifying is that the Abbot of Amboise is the spitting image of the Doctor himself. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 5th of February 1966 and concluded on the 26th of the same month. The 4 individual episodes were titled as War of God, The Sea Beggar, Priest of Death, and Bell of Doom. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and oh boy, things start falling fast. Despite a strong start of 8 million, the following week we see a 2 million drop to 6 million, with further smaller declines happening for the remaining 2 episodes. These are the lowest ratings since the show's beginning in 1963 so far, so just what on earth happened? Well, one factor to mention was that with the beginning of this story, it marked Doctor Who having its time slot changed. For quite some time the show had been going out at 5:50 PM, with great success. But with The Massacre, the show returned to its original 5:15 PM time slot. But it was now directly poised up against the majority of ITV rival, Thank Your Lucky Stars, which was still enduring high popularity. Audiences were also potentially burnt out on Who overall, after just going through a 3-month-long adventure in the Daleks' master plan. Furthermore, this story was a historical affair, and from what we know, a very dark and bleak one. The subject matter alone is surprising territory for Doctor Who, but from what we have available to listen to, many moments push the boundaries for 5:15 PM on a Saturday evening. All 4 episodes are currently lost, and no censor clips exist of this story, making it particularly elusive. Though the soundtrack was recently released on vinyl for Record Store Day, it can still be enjoyed as a Target novelization, and also as an audio drama. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.4 million viewers, a huge 3 million drop from the previous story. This is the lowest story average since the Season 1 ending, Reign of Terror, that had aired just under 18 months beforehand. So these figures can tell us that The Massacre was a turning point in terms of how successful Doctor Who was in the ratings field. 6.4 million isn't terrible in 1966, but from what the show had been consistently achieving for over a year, it certainly made higher-ups at the BBC take notice.
Perhaps I should go home. Back to my home planet. But I can't.
The 6th story of Season 3 is The Ark. After stumbling into the TARDIS, new companion Dodo Chaplet almost kills the last surviving members of the human race by passing on her coal to them on a futuristic space ark. However, when the travellers visit 700 years later, it appears that the former slaves, the Monoids, have taken over. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 5th of March 1966 and concluded on the 26th of the same month. The 4 individual episodes were titled as The Steel Sky, The Plague, The Return, and The Bomb. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes. It seems that at the start of the story, viewing figures continued to decline, with episode 1 marking the first time since the show's debut that it fell outside the top 100 programmes of the week. However, by episode 4, we have seen a rise back to a very respectable 7.3 million. By this point, Doctor Who was in a sort of freefall with the television ratings and the viewing public too. Still going out at 5:15, but facing some heavy competition on the other side. The Ark itself is only one of 3 stories of Season 3 that exists in its entirety, so it's one of few stories from this year you can fully enjoy as broadcast. And what's the main thing people remember about this one? Well, it can only be the lovely Monoids here, can't it? The Daleks, these folks were not. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.5 million viewers, a very slight increase over The Massacre. Again, it's important to point out that this average is not terrible by any means, but it continues to mark the transition from Doctor Who's hyper-popularity in 1965 into audiences either growing tired or moving on to new shows in 1966. The Ark isn't a bad story by any means, and it's also Dodo's first proper adventure in the TARDIS, so for a new companion, it's one to check out if you have the chance.
You have had my last warning. Do as I say.
The 7th story of Season 3 is The Celestial Toymaker. The TARDIS team end up in a strange fantasy dimension, operated by the sinister Celestial Toymaker. Can they beat his games and get out of the place alive, or will they become the Toymaker's playthings forever? This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 2nd of April 1966 and concluded on the 23rd of the same month. The 4 individual episodes were titled as The Celestial Toy Room, The Hall of Dolls, The Dancing Floor, and The Final Test. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes. Now here we have a dramatic shoot up in viewership from the previous 2 stories, with a peak of 9.4 million for episode 3 and a low of 7.8 million the following week. The Celestial Toymaker helped Doctor Who bounce back into the top 50 programmes for each week it was on. One key reason for the bounce could be put down to the change in time slot, as the show was now broadcasting once again at 5:50 PM. It may seem odd to believe airing 35 minutes later than normal could do much, but when airing against things like the ITV News, no wonder people wanted some entertainment. However, this serial drew a lot of complaints, with many parents and critics claiming the story's tone was too violent and scary for younger children, especially due to the fact that a lot of childish elements, such as toys and games, were being turned into sinister nightmares for the Doctor's companions. However, one of the big strengths of this serial is Michael Gough as the Toymaker himself, truly a match for William Hartnell's Doctor. Speaking of Hartnell, he is invisible for most of the story. This plot element was deemed necessary in order to give the lead actor a rest, his health rapidly declining and his temper rising with each week of recording. It was discussed as to whether he should be replaced in the role at the end of the story, although Hartnell would hang on in the part for another 6 months before, well, we'll come to that. Overall, this story attracted an average of 8.3 million viewers, a nice 1.8 million boost from the previous story. With all the controversy regarding the violence and sinister tone, and the brilliant performances from the leads and Michael Gough as the Toymaker, I bet you want to see this story for yourself. Unfortunately, only episode 4 remains in the BBC archive, which can be viewed on the Lost in Time DVD box set. You can read the brilliant Target novelisation, which is one of the best in my opinion, and you can also listen to it as an audio drama. The Toymaker has not appeared on TV since this story, but he did return in the 6th Doctor sequel, The Nightmare Fair, which you can enjoy as a book or an audio drama from Big Finish.
Make your last move, Doctor. Make your last move.
The 8th story of Season 3 is The Gunfighters. Tombstone, Arizona, 1881. The Doctor and his friends arrive mainly so the Doctor can have his teeth fixed, but little do they know they're about to stumble into the most infamous gunfight in the West, the battle at the OK Corral. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 30th of April 1966 and concluded on the 21st of May. The 4 individual episodes were titled as A Holiday for the Doctor, Don't Shoot the Pianist, Johnny Ringo, and the OK Corral. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes. Sadly, we can see that things have taken a sharp tumble once again, going from consistently grabbing 8 million viewers per episode down to around 6 million. This is partly due to the move into the summer months, where audience members generally decline anyway, but another reason could be down to the setting of the story itself. This tale is bold for trying to place the Doctor into the Wild West, and sadly, it didn't go down well critically at all. Many criticising the dodgy American accents, the constant inclusion of a musical song, and just more farcical elements that didn't connect with viewers. Despite this hugely negative response and the lowest audience appreciation scores at that point, The Gunfighter still manages to exist in its entirety. It would be over 45 years before Doctor Who attempted a Western-style episode again, not until A Town Called Mercy in 2012. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.3 million viewers, a huge drop of 2 million viewers from the Celestial Toymaker's average. Now we're back to the level seen at the start of the year, and the critical bashing of the Gunfighters from reviewers and the public certainly didn't help either. Despite not being to everyone's taste, the Gunfighters serves as an interesting experiment attempted in Doctor Who's early years, and if you want to make your own judgment as to how it turned out, you can check the story out on DVD.
Doc, I would like you to meet the Clanton brothers.
The Clanton brothers. Oh dear. I mean, how do you do?
The 9th and penultimate story of Season 3 is The Savages. The Doctor, Stephen and Dodo arrive on a planet where innocent workers are having their life force drained from them by a power-mad ruling class, the Elders. Dare they get involved in the inner politics of this planet and its people? The story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 28th of May 1966 and concluded on the 18th of June. There are no individual episode titles for this story, or indeed any story for the remainder of the classic era of the show. From here on out, each episode was titled simply by a number, which some people prefer, myself included. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and as you can see, numbers are sliding further downward as the series progresses, reaching a new low of 4.5 million by the story's end, and a peak of only 5.6 million with episode 2. The show's time slot was shifted again, this time moving 15 minutes earlier to 5:35 PM. Shaking up a show's broadcast slot partway through a season could mean severe damage back in the 60s, as the luxury we have of catch-up and recording simply did not exist back then. Furthermore, when looking at the critical reviews of the time, it seems that audiences more and more weren't really connecting with the stories being put out, whether that was their setting or their tone or even the acting involved. But by the time The Savages concluded, where we also said goodbye to Stephen, it seemed like Doctor Who was now permanently on the decline, and potentially on the way out for good. Overall, this story attracted an average of 5 million viewers, a further 1.3 million drop from the previous story, but also marking the lowest average for a Doctor Who story at that point in time. As the story doesn't currently exist in the BBC archives, you can either check out The Savages as a Target novelisation or an audio drama release. But even in 1966, 5 million for a 4-part drama is not a strong average, and considering this is the penultimate story of the season, talks would have been rife amongst the production team and the BBC higher-ups as to whether they push on with a season 4 or whether this little sci-fi show should call it a day. And with Hartnell's health deteriorating at now rapid rates, the latter option was becoming ever more apparent.
Goodbye, Doctor. Goodbye, Stephen, and good luck.
The 10th and final story of Season 3 is The War Machines. At the top of the brand new post office tower, the supercomputer Wotan is brainwashing humans, ordering them to build the deadly war machines. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 25th of June 1966 and concluded on the 16th of July. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and things don't seem to be improving that much. 3 of the 4 episodes sit comfortably within the 5 million range, with episode 2 dropping to a low of 4.7 million. Time slot wise, episodes 1 and 3 went out at the usual 5:35 PM, episode 4 aired at 5:15, and episode 2 aired at the much later time of 6:55 PM. This was due to extended coverage of the Wimbledon tennis tournament. But with the story jumping around the time slots, that can't have helped either bring new viewers in or indeed assist existing viewers who may not have been aware of the changes. The War Machines itself, I would argue, is a very different story for the Hartnell era. Taking place in the then current day of 1966, getting 2 new young companions of the time in Ben and Polly, and having a threat closer to home, and in many ways it feels more like a second Doctor story than the first. And these kinds of tales will become a lot more frequent as we move into the next few seasons. Dodo disappears halfway through the story, given a bit of a flimsy exit, but Ben and Polly bring so much new and fun energy, contrasting well with Hartnell's more grouchy, rougher exterior. Thankfully, The War Machines does exist in its entirety, with all 4 episodes being available to watch on DVD. The transmission of episode 4 also marked the end of season 3 of Doctor Who, concluding a mammoth 10-month run, totaling 45 episodes, making season 3 the biggest in the show's history in terms of episode count. It's just such a shame that more than half of it is missing, with 28 episodes currently lost. Overall, this story attracted an average of 5.2 million viewers, a small improvement from The Savages, but far from the huge averages seen in the previous year. It's quite a shame that the final average for season 3 is so low, but by the same token, it doesn't take anything away from the story. The War Machine serves as one of the most interesting tales in Hartnell's era, and certainly influenced countless stories that were to come in the future. So that's season 3, the 10 stories that comprise it and the ratings that they garnered. So let's have a look at the story averages for this season. We can see that the highest story average actually came at the start of the season, with Galaxy 4 averaging out at 9.9 million viewers. Those numbers decline gradually as the stories progress, bar the shoot-up with the Celestial Toymaker, and the lowest average being The Savages, at bang on 5 million. The highs of Galaxy 4 could be put down to the end of the show's hyper-popularity, which was starting to wind down as 1965 came to a close. Also, it's the season opener, and those tend to gain more viewers typically. The lows of The Savages and The War Machines are down to several factors: the move into summer, audiences not connecting with the new stories, being lured away by ITV competition, whether they be American imports or new homegrown programs, and quite possibly just a bit of Doctor Who fatigue. Don't forget, merchandise for the show, particularly the Daleks, was quite literally everywhere in the UK back in the mid-60s. And with the show only being off the air for just under 2 months of the year, it's not unreasonable to suggest people may have just gotten tired and wanted to watch something new, as the show was now being criticised for becoming stale, with more of the same being delivered every week. I would argue that couldn't be further from the truth, but I wasn't around back in 1966. So to start with nearly 10 million viewers and concluding with just over half of that, it doesn't bode very well for Doctor Who. Television was just as ruthless back in the 60s as it is now, and if shows weren't doing very well, no matter how popular or well established, they would be taken off the air. If we work out the average amount of viewers across the entire season, we can calculate that the average for Season 3 of Doctor Who is around roughly 7.4 million viewers, which is a massive 3 million decrease from the previous season's average. 7.4 million is still a decent season average, but as you can probably tell, this really marked the end of Doctor Who's first golden age in terms of ratings and viewing figures. Gone were the 11 and 12 million figures for each week, with some episodes now gaining less than half of that. But Doctor Who would go on, with a brand new season, and partway through it, a brand new Doctor. It's the autumn of 1966. Children are returning to school after the summer break, and not only are Saturdays the prime time for families to relax from work, but it's also the day when Doctor Who would return to the tea time slot. From September of 1965 to July of 1966, the show's third season had aired. The 10 stories that comprised it were all quite different, despite scathing reviews that suggested otherwise, but after a strong start, the ratings took a sharp decline, going from story average of 9.9 million for the season opener, all the way down to a 5.2 million average for the concluding story. The season average came out at around 7.4 million viewers, a weaker figure than both seasons 1 and 2. With season 4 beginning, this heralded the biggest and most notable change in the show yet. With his health really declining and affecting his work, William Hartnell was to leave the part at the end of October. The first 2 series of season 4 are his, but for the remaining 7 adventures, we have a brand new actor leading the show. But more on that when we get there. The prevailing question was at the time, with a change in lead actor, could the show survive? And what would it do to those all-important viewing figures? The first story from season 4 is The Smugglers. The Doctor, Ben and Polly arrive on a windswept Cornish coastline in the 17th century and get involved in a crooked tale of piracy and smuggling. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 10th of September 1966 and concluded on the 1st of October. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and ouch, that is not a good way to start things off. No single episode of this story cracked the 5 million mark, which people make a fuss of today, but back in 1966 this would have been a massive red flag, especially as the return of a popular show is meant to bring in big figures. Episode 3 brings in the lowest individual rating in the show's history thus far, clocking in at 4.2 million. The Smugglers didn't really have a good chance from the off. Competition on the other side at ITV included popular veterinary soap Weaver's Green, and in many other regions talent show Opportunity Knocks. So despite airing in the 5:50 PM slot, a time which before had proved a successful point in the day for Doctor Who, not even that could save it from low viewing figures. The Smugglers is also a historical story, which at this point were really falling out of favour with areas of the public, with some children describing on an edition of Junior Points of View that they were bored with the series. I would say give this story another chance with a rewatch, but unfortunately we can't. You guessed it, just like a lot of the previous season, all 4 episodes of The Smugglers are currently missing from the BBC archives. Some censor clips, moments cut in overseas prints, do survive, but aside from that, the best way to relive this dive into smuggling for the TARDIS team is either via the Target novelisation or as an audio drama. Overall, this story attracted an average of 4.5 million viewers, a terrible new low for the series. This was the first time Doctor Who would average a figure lower than 5 million, and considering this was the penultimate tale to feature William Hartnell, I'm sure some folks at the BBC may have considered it best cancelling the show after he left in the next adventure. Thankfully, that did not happen, and that very last story for Hartnell would prove to be one of the most momentous in the show's long history.
Fare ye well. Jamaica.
The second story from Season 4 is The 10th Planet, Antarctica, 1986. The TARDIS team join forces with members of Snowcap Base, in order to prevent the threat of the residents of the planet Mondas, better known as the Cybermen. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 8th of October 1966 and concluded on the 29th of the same month. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and thank goodness we see a great improvement here for William Hartnell's final story. Despite a low start of 5.5 million, by story's end, viewing figures are comfortably well within the 7 million range. Whilst there was still decent competition on ITV, the 10th Planet got bolstered up by a few reasons. One is obviously down to the fact that by this point, the public had known that William Hartnell would be stepping down from the role of the Doctor, so the boost, particularly towards the end of the story, could indicate the viewer interest that there was in seeing what would happen and just who would take over. Also, this story had a futuristic theme to it, not just in the time period of the then faraway 1986, but also with the Cybermen, human-like creatures augmented with electronics and cybernetics. These Mondasian Cybermen, as they came to be known, are still quite chilling to look at and listen to. They may not be as sleek or sophisticated as later Cybermen designs, but the fact they most closely resemble a human being makes it even more of a horrific concept. All episodes still exist today apart from episode 4. However, we still have footage of the iconic closing moment, the first regeneration. William Hartnell faded away, and in his place lay Patrick Troughton, a respected character actor who was now the second Doctor Who. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.8 million viewers, a huge welcome increase from The Smugglers, beating that story's average by over 2 million. This is nowhere near the dizzying heights the show was achieving throughout its second season, but it's a healthy figure nonetheless. The 10th Planet is still enjoyable today, whether that be as a DVD, a Target book, or as an audio drama. It serves as a blueprint for how the show would be presented in the following few years, introduces one of the most classic recurring villains, and provides a very fitting end to the First Doctor's era.
Emotions, love, pride, hate, fear. Have you no emotions, sir? Come to mind.
Let's have a look at the season averages all the way through the William Hartnell years. Season 2 reigns supreme, averaging 10.4 million viewers across its 9 stories. Season 1 comes second, with 8.1 million over 8 stories, and then Season 3 with 7.4 million over 10 stories, and finishing with Season 4, an average of 5.7 million. However, one important factor to take into account regarding Season 4, Hartnell was only the Doctor for 2 of the 9 stories. And although these figures do show that Doctor Who had a great first year, an even better second year, but then the early stages of decline began to set in with Season 3 and continued into Season 4. Just to be super nerdy with numbers for a second, by combining these season averages we can calculate that the average ratings for the Hartnell era of Doctor Who comes in at 7.9 million viewers. That's a pretty healthy average across Hartnell's 3 years in the role, and shows that even if the show's popularity began to slip in 1966, enough people had watched and fallen in love with the crotchety but kind old man that we only knew as the Doctor.
Just go forward in all your beliefs and prove to me that I am not mistaken in mine.
The third story from Season 4 is The Power of the Daleks. Landing on the planet Vulcan, Ben, Polly and the new Doctor discover that the Daleks are being reactivated, but they seem to be acting as servants? How long will this facade last? This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 5th of November 1966 and concluded on the 10th of December. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes. We can see that the numbers are holding nice and firm in the 7 million range, with the peak being episode 5, which just cracked into 8 million. A solid performance for the second Doctor's first story. That would be an incredibly strong reason as to why this story had better ratings compared to the previous 2 tales of Season 4. People wanted to see this new Doctor in action, and just how different he would be to the old man we'd been used to for 3 years. Also, the Daleks were back. Even though Dalek Mania wasn't what it was a year earlier, they were already cemented as the most popular Doctor Who villain, so pairing them against a new Doctor was a surefire way not just to appeal to long-time fans by bringing back a recurring monster, but also to see if the Daleks could still pack the ratings punch they had done previously. Competition on ITV wasn't impacting as much as it did at the start of the season, but even though ratings were better, reviews were not. A lot of publications, and viewers for that matter, found that they weren't warming to this new Doctor, at least not for now. But with the show recording episodes only 2 weeks before broadcast, the BBC almost didn't have the time to stop and consider this. They had their new Doctor, and they were going to, in typical British fashion, carry on regardless. Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.8 million viewers, a 1 million increase from the previous story. We've discussed how the new Doctor and the Daleks were sure to draw audience interest, arguably being the biggest reason for this numerical boost, but sadly all 6 episodes of The Power of the Daleks are missing from the archive. However, this serial was animated and released on DVD. Twice. Yep, it was released in 2016 and then as a special edition with improved animation and extra bonus features in 2020. I would say go for the 2020 version if you already don't own a copy of the story, but you can also enjoy Power as a Virgin adaptation book, albeit a more expensive one, or as an audio drama, which coincidentally was my very first audio that was Doctor Who related. The 4th story from Season 4 is The Highlanders. The time travellers land in Scotland, 1746, and fall in with some Highlanders during the Battle of Culloden, and also meet a new ally, the headstrong but charming Jamie McCrimmon. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 17th of December 1966 and concluded on the 7th of January 1967. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and we can see things have dipped slightly. The peak of the story comes with episode 3, which sits at 7.4 million viewers, and the lowest being episode 1, which gained an audience of 6.7 million. These are still decent figures for a show in 1967, and there are several potential reasons for the drop in the previous story. One being that The Highlanders is a historical, and by this point these kinds of stories weren't enjoyed by many viewers of the audience, and the reaction to this story in fact prompted those who ran the show at the time to abandon purely historical affairs for more futuristic, monster-based stories. Also, some ITV regions were showing Batman. Yes, that Batman. The Highlanders is most remembered nowadays for being the introduction of Fraser Hines as Jamie McCrimmon, and the Scottish character would end up being aboard the TARDIS crew for the rest of the Second Doctor's era, becoming one of the longest-serving companions ever. Unfortunately, like Power of the Daleks before it, no episode of The Highlanders still exists in the BBC archives. It's the usual methods if you want to enjoy this story today, so either a Target novelisation or an audio drama. Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.1 million viewers, a steady drop from the previous story, but still a decent average in retrospect. As 1967 rolled in with the conclusion of this story, it was also meaning the end of the purely historical stories for a very, very long time. But as less trips into the past were to occur, that did mean we were going to see monsters. A lot of monsters.
Doctor, can we take him with us?
If he teaches me to play the bagpipes.
If you want, Doctor.
Oh, that's all we need.
Come on, Jamie.
But where are we going?
You'll see.
The 5th story from Season 4 is The Underwater Menace. In the legendary city of Atlantis, the insane Professor Zaroff plans to drain the world's oceans for his own evil schemes, and nothing in the world can stop him now. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 14th of January 1967 and concluded on the 4th of February. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes. Ratings seem to be holding steady as the Troughton era progresses. All episodes gained over 7 million viewers, with episode 1 being the peak with 8.3 million. So is it fair to say at this point that audiences were now settling with the Second Doctor? Well, you would think that looking at the numbers, but if you look at the many reviews from the time, people still weren't really enjoying Troughton's performance. ITV in some regions was still showing the ever-popular Batman, but I have my own theory. Those who tuned into Power of the Daleks to see the new Doctor really enjoyed what they saw, and maybe they preferred this more clownish fellow to the brasher, sterner Hartnell, thus tuning in every week to a show they felt they could now connect with. That's just a theory after all, but at least Doctor Who was gaining ratings that were considered good within the TV world. The Underwater Menace may not be the most memorable story ever, but it serves as the earliest example we can see of a Troughton story in its original form. As for years, only episode 3 survived in the BBC archives, and episode 2 was then found and returned in 2011. Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.5 million viewers. This is a small improvement from the Highlanders, but still not rising above the 7.8 million average set by Power of the Daleks. However, saying that, again, a 7.5 million average in 1967 is more than respectable. To enjoy The Underwater Menace today, there's the Target book, the audio release, and a DVD release, although keep in mind this only contains episodes 2 and 3 as they were filmed with episodes 1 and 4 being reconstructed via telesnaps. There's always rumours that another DVD release will come with the missing episodes being animated, and it may well happen, but time will tell. Always does.
Nothing in the world can stop me now!
The 6th story from Season 4 is The Moonbase. The year is 2070, and Earth's weather is controlled by a station on the moon. The Doctor and his friends arrive initially under suspicion from the crew, but once the Cybermen arrive, they must work together to save the Earth and to survive. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 11th of February 1967 and concluded on the 4th of March. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and this looks much better. Every episode gains over 8 million viewers, with episode 2 being the peak, reaching 8.9 million, and the main driving force behind this increase could be placed down to promotion. The producer of Doctor Who at the time, Innes Lloyd, pulled all the strings he could to really deliver a good promotional run for the Moonbase, including a special trailer, which weren't as common as they are on TV today, extensive coverage in the Radio Times, and the story's author, Kit Pedler, being featured in many interviews. The Cybermen had been redesigned for their return, and their reappearance was also being used as a factor to pull audiences back in. I'm glad they did promote this story a lot because it truly is a beauty. A nice, tight base under siege tale in 4 parts, the Cybermen redesign looks great, and they still remain a chilling foe for the Doctor to face. The story was released on DVD in 2014, although episodes 1 and 3 are currently missing, so these are presented via animation. There is also the Target book, retitled to Doctor Who and the Cybermen, and an audio release. Overall, this story attracted an average of 8.3 million viewers, the highest average of the season so far, and the highest average since The Celestial Toymaker, which also gained the same figure. With the success of the Cybermen now established, it wouldn't be long before the cyborgs would be back on viewers' TV screens, the BBC hoping that they would reach or maybe even eclipse the popularity of the Daleks, who were looking to be moved away from Doctor Who by their creator and owner, Terry Nation. But with ratings at a new high with the Moonbase and the next few stories promising new monsters, surely things were only going to keep going up, right?
There are some corners of the universe which have bred the most terrible things. Things which act against everything that we believe in. They must be fought.
The 7th story from Season 4 is the Macra Terror. In the midst of a human colony, the TARDIS crew discover along with its inhabitants that the colony has been infiltrated by the giant crab-like Macra. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 11th of March 1967 and concluded on the 1st of April. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and despite an ever so slight drop from the Moonbase, we can see that ratings are holding pretty firm. 3 out of the 4 episodes passed the 8 million mark, with episode 2 being the only exception, just missing out by gaining 7.9 million. Though keep in mind, these are still very respectable figures in late 60s television. The Macra were touted in promotional material to be a truly sinister threat, and indeed the concept had legs to develop into an instantly classic monster for the series. However, the combination of the rather cumbersome Macra prop, along with it being barely viewable or even convincing in the final story, led to it being a monster that for many years was seen as a bit of a joke. The Macra wouldn't be seen in the show for another 40 years, finally returning in the 2007 story, Gridlock. If you were first introduced to the Macra through this 10th Doctor story and want to see how they got their start, you have a few options. You have the usual suspects, Target novelization, audio release, but you also have the animated reconstruction available on DVD and Blu-ray. All 4 episodes are currently missing from the archives bar a few clips, so the animated reconstruction is your best bet for trying to experience the tale in full, both in terms of audio and visuals. Overall, this story attracted an average of 8.2 million viewers, a very small drop from the Moonbase indeed. I think these figures show that the now shifted focus to stories more centred around futuristic settings and menacing monsters was working in terms of gaining the interest of the viewing public, but also entertaining them in such a way that they kept returning week after week. Sure, we still aren't seeing 10 million plus figures like we did a few seasons ago, but 8 million averages showed that early in Patrick Troughton's time as the Doctor, people were watching, and as the weeks went on, they began to enjoy and take into his Doctor.
There's another one!
The 8th and penultimate story of Season 4 is The Faceless Ones. After a shaky landing at London Gatwick Airport, the Doctor discovers the deadly chameleons luring young holidaygoers to their orbiting satellite, in order to have them possessed for their own ends. This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 8th of April 1967 and concluded on the 13th of May. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes, and we seem to be a bit all over the place here. The story's opening and closing episode both attained the peak viewership, with 8 million viewers. Episode 2 has the lowest ratings at 6.4 million, and the remaining episodes all hover just under or over the 7 million mark, and Episode 3 almost claws at 8 million, but falling just short and finishing with 7.9 million. The big dips in this story ratings-wise is an oddity really. All 6 episodes went out at the normal 5:50 PM time slot, and competition on ITV was also consistent. Maybe the additions of their programs, such as Doddy's Magic Box, Batman and Just Jimmy, were just really good installments partway across the 6 weeks that The Faceless Ones was broadcast in. The story itself sees the departure of companions Ben and Polly, after it's revealed that this story takes place on exactly the same day as their debut, The War Machines. We can't see this departure in its original form, however, as only episodes 1 and 3 of this story exist in the BBC archive. These surviving episodes, alongside all surviving episodes for this season, can be found on the Lost in Time DVD box set. Or if you want to enjoy The Faceless Ones in full, you have the Target novel, the audio release, and the story was animated in full and released on DVD and Blu-ray in 2020. Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.4 million viewers. Now this is almost a million drop from the previous story, but there is a few things to take note. One being that the lower viewing figures for episode 2 and 4 dragged this story's average down considerably from what it could have been had all the episodes had similar ratings. Secondly, as this was a 6-part story as opposed to a 4-part one, it has a longer time to try and keep audiences hooked, as if people jumped off partway through, there is more chance more would hop off if the story doesn't captivate them. However, The Faceless Ones continues the trend of having either a present-day or futuristic setting, with evil aliens being the source of the problem, and the story's conclusion would lead right into the events of the season's finale.
It's a flying beastie!
The 9th and final story from Season 4 is The Evil of the Daleks. The TARDIS has gone missing, and the Doctor and Jamie discover that the Daleks are behind it. With new companion Victoria, can they defeat the Daleks, prevent them from using the human factor to turn them into unstoppable creatures, and escape the wrath of a full-blown civil war? This story is comprised of 7 episodes, which began airing on the 20th of May, 1967, and concluded on the 1st of July. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 7 episodes, and oh, for a Dalek story, these figures are far from the best. Episode 1 kicks things off strongly with 8.1 million viewers tuning in, but from there everything drops, the lowest point being episode 5 with only 5.1 million viewers, a 3 million drop from the opener. So for a season finale and a Dalek story at that, what on earth happened? Well, the time slots across the 7 episodes are a bit all over too. Episode 1 aired at 6 PM due to FA Cup coverage, Episode 7 went out at 6:25 due to Wimbledon coverage, and with all the remaining episodes going out at the usual 5:50 PM slot. In the past, time slot shifts have affected Doctor Who's ratings, but the 6 PM showing of Episode 1 gained the highest figures for the story, so that point is arguably moot. In terms of competition, depending on what region you lived in, you had the option of either ITV's selection of talent shows, comedies, or American imports. Also, Evil of the Daleks broadcast into the summer months, a typical time for audience figures to drop across all television. Finally, despite the extensive promotion for this story, due to the Daleks appearing once again, I think by this point, summer of 1967, Dalek Mania had well and truly ended. The Pepper Pots were still popular, but they no longer commanded the pull they once had only a few years prior. Audiences could have easily been tired of seeing the Daleks yet again in just under 6 months from their last appearance. But in any case, Season 4 of Doctor Who ended with a new companion, Deborah Watling's Victoria, aboard the TARDIS, and the Daleks facing their final end. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.4 million viewers, a million drop from the previous story and the lowest average rating for a Dalek story thus far. It is a real shame that what could have well been the last Dalek story at that time had the lowest viewership of any of their appearances. But for what it's worth, Evil of the Daleks is a contender for not just one of the best Dalek stories of the 60s, but one of the best Dalek stories in all of Classic Who. Episode 2 is the only surviving episode in the archives, and you can see that on the Lost in Time box set. There is an expensive novelisation of this story available, and also an audio release. An animated reconstruction is heavily rumoured to be released sometime in 2021.
You will help the Daleks test another human being.
What sort of test?
Do not question.
I will not be your slave!
Doctor, I beg you.
Now before we round things off for this season, we actually have some repeat viewing figures for you. The Evil of the Daleks has the rare distinction of being one of the few stories from the 60s era of Doctor Who to get a repeat during the 60s itself. At the end of Season 5's finale, The Wheel in Space, the Doctor is preparing to tell new companion Zoe a tale involving the dreaded Daleks, just so she knows what she's in for when they go aboard the TARDIS. This then led into a full repeat of Evil over the next 7 Saturdays, perfectly filling the 7-week gap between the end of Season 5 and the start of Season 6. Here is the individual viewing figures and the average ratings for the repeat, that began airing on the 8th of June and concluded on the 3rd of August of 1968. We see the repeat figures are fairly stable, despite a drop to 4.2 million with episode 6, and an average of 5.3 million, over a million drop from its original broadcast run.
Have you ever heard of the Daleks?
No.
Then watch.
So that's season 4, the 9 stories that comprise it and the ratings that they garnered. With the transmission of episode 7 of The Evil of the Daleks on the 1st of July 1967, season 4 of Doctor Who was brought to an end. The season ran for just under 10 months and was made up of 43 episodes across 9 stories. The fact that they recorded most of this season's episode either only a week or 2 weeks before their transmission and still delivered some cracking stories to us is honestly quite remarkable. Let's have a look at the story averages for this season, from the point where Patrick Troughton took over. We can see that the highest story average was with the Moonbase, standing at 8.3 million. The lowest point came with the finale, The Evil of the Daleks, which came in at 6.4 million viewers who tuned in to see the Doctor's supposed final battle with the sinister Pepperpots. Looking at the numbers across the second Doctor's first set of stories, it's positive to see that for the most part everything looks moderately healthy. I'm sure the BBC hoped and wanted the show to once again reach the 10 million plus viewers with all the shake-ups and changes the show was having, but sadly those heights would have to wait until later down the line. But one thing was for certain, the new Doctor was here to stay, and the TARDIS team were going to face more monsters, many more monsters in the next few seasons to come. If we work out the average amount of viewers across the entire season, we can calculate that the average for season 4 of Doctor Who is around roughly 7.5 million viewers, which is a very slight increase from the average of the previous season. Now this figure only takes into account the stories featuring Patrick Troughton as the Doctor. If we include the 2 Hartnell tales for a moment, the average decreases to 7.1 million viewers, a lower figure than season 3. And this is undoubtedly due to the low ratings of the Smugglers. But for Patrick Troughton's first run of stories to technically be slightly more successful audience-wise than Hartnell's final full season, if anything, it showed that the changes in the show's direction to less historical and more science fantasy-based adventures was working. And this is the motif the production team would continue with for the rest of the 1960s. It's the autumn of 1967, and being off the air for 9 weeks, the longest gap yet, Doctor Who was set to return guns blazing for its 5th season, and the second to feature Patrick Troughton in the lead role. The first set of adventures in season 4 had been a mixed bag in terms of ratings and their reaction from audiences. On the positive side, the shift to stories more focused on monsters rather than history was proven to be a success, with season 4 not only returning the favourites like the Daleks and the Cybermen, but also introducing new creatures such as the Fish People, the Macra, and the Chameleons. And viewing figures didn't completely bomb from when Troughton took over, so the future of the show was secured for now. On the negative side, initial reviews of Troughton's performance both in the press and by some viewers had been scathing to say the least. By season's end, I would argue people had finally settled into the idea of a new man taking over the role, but it was a rocky road to get there. Season 4 averaged at 7.1 million viewers, that's including the 2 Hartnell stories. In terms of just Troughton's time, that figure becomes 7.5 million. So the main question now, as season 5 made its way to air, was what monsters were we going to see this time? And more importantly, for the BBC at least, could those viewing figures be increased even higher? The first story from season 5 is The Tomb of the Cybermen. Landing on the planet Telos, the TARDIS team along with an expedition group discover the Cybermen are frozen in underground ice tombs, waiting to be resurrected. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 2nd of September 1967 and concluded on the 23rd of the same month. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and it's an interesting start to say the least. I would argue a 6 million start for episode 1 of a season opener in 1967 isn't necessarily the best, but it's nice to see that number grow over the next 3 weeks. Episode 4 in fact is the peak in viewing figures at 7.4 million. So one thing is clear, it's that viewers were clearly hooked by this story, and more people wanted to find out what was the talk of the playground that week. As always, we have to look at what was going on at the time and how it could have impacted the ratings. For one, this story, along with the season, got a good bout of promotion. Trailers on TV, the front cover of the Radio Times, extensive interviews with members of the show. Doctor Who by all accounts was still aiming to make quite a splash with its 5th run of adventures. In terms of competition on ITV, talent show Opportunity Knocks was still being shown in various regions. It was just as popular as modern talent shows are now, so it's understandable to assume a chunk of potential audience for Tomb could have been tuned into the other side instead. But the big draw of this story, which was emphasised at the time, was the return of the Cybermen. The Silver Cyborgs had been extremely popular in their 2 appearances in Season 4, so having them feature in a season opener was a pretty smart move. After Episode 4 aired, there were quite a few complaints from parents that the show was getting too violent. It didn't have much repercussions at the time, but it was a stark warning of how criticism would come to the show in the future. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.8 million viewers. This is over a 2 million increase from the Season 4 opener, The Smugglers, which only had a 4.5 million average. It's a 0.4 increase from the Season 4 finale, The Evil of the Daleks, so perhaps not the huge opening numbers the BBC were hoping for. For the next 25 years it was believed that this story was lost, but copies of all 4 episodes were found in 1992, in Hong Kong of all places. Since then it's been released on VHS, DVD, as well as having a target novel and an audio release. The Tomb of the Cybermen is such a great jumping on point for people looking to start classic Who, and still stands as one of the greatest stories of the original television series run.
You belong to us. You shall be like us.
The second story from Season 5 is The Abominable Snowmen. In 1930s Tibet, a being known as the Great Intelligence is trying to take a physical form, with the help of an army of Yeti. This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 30th of September 1967 and concluded on the 4th of November. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes, and things seem to be holding pretty steady from the previous tale. The lowest point is episode 2, which matches the season opening episode with 6 million viewers. The peak comes with episode 6, which had 7.4 million tuning in, again matching the peak of the previous story, Tomb of the Cybermen. An interesting change is that the show shifted time slot, moving from its normal 5:50 PM to an earlier 5:25. This was due to some schedule shuffling on the BBC's part, and in the past we've seen that time slot changes can do some major damage to Doctor Who's ratings. However, it seems on this occasion that thankfully didn't happen. Competition on ITV at this time generally consisted of reruns in most regions, which only helped Doctor Who, as more viewers wanted to see new programming on a Saturday night. The Abominable Snowmen is memorable for the introduction of the Yeti, who were quick to become a favourite monster amongst fans. So quickly, in fact, that a sequel story was already placed into Season 5 schedule whilst the story was being transmitted. Also, Deborah Watling, who played Companion Victoria, had some family company, as her father Jack guested in this story as Professor Travers. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.9 million viewers. A very small increase from the previous story's average, but a welcome one at that. This story is also 2 parts longer than Tomb of the Cybermen, so the fact that it did better over a longer time shows that audiences were captivated by this Tibetan adventure. The Yeti's instant popularity ensured their return in just a few stories, but sadly, for their debut, only episode 2 exists in the archives. This episode can be seen on the Lost in Time DVD box set, and is also available as a Target book and via an audio release.
This creature certainly doesn't seem to be flesh and blood.
What?
It's not your abominable snowman either, Trevor.
The third story from Season 5 is The Ice Warriors. The year is 3000 AD, and in the midst of a second ice age, the time travelers, along with the scientific crew, must work together to prevent the threat of the Ice Warriors. This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 11th of November 1967 and concluded on the 16th of December. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes, and we can see things are improving even further. Only 1 episode falls below 7 million, and the peak comes with 5, which hit bang on 8 million viewers. There are a few arguable reasons as to why this story saw a rise in viewership. One of these being that broadcasting over November and December meant that more people were likely to be watching TV indoors. Second, hot off the heels of the successful Yeti, the Ice Warriors proved to be a captivating monster for audiences to be fearful of and take an interest in. Also, ITV competition at the 5:25 PM time slot was relatively weak. And finally, during the Ice Warriors broadcast, Blue Peter ran a designer Doctor Who monster competition, with the winners to be judged by the Doctor himself. This competition was extremely popular, receiving 250,000 entries. I believe that the interest around this competition helped the boost in performance for the Ice Warriors ratings. Perhaps some entrants hadn't watched Doctor Who for a while, and by flexing their imagination for the competition, it inspired them to tune in again. A hypothesis, of course, but a potential reason nonetheless. Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.3 million viewers, a 500,000 increase from the previous story. So we're seeing an overall steady rise in Season 5 so far, and long may that continue. The Ice Warriors is a great introductory tale for the Martian giants, but sadly only 2/3 of the story exist in the BBC archives. 2 and 3 are missing, but thankfully were animated for the story's DVD release in 2013. You can also enjoy the story as a target book or as an audio adventure. And just like the Yeti before them, the Ice Warriors would return, and go on to be one of the most memorable classic monsters in all of Doctor Who's history. The fourth story from Season 5 is The Enemy of the World. In the year 2018, most of the world is under threat from the vicious dictator, Salamander, who coincidentally is the spitting image of the Doctor himself. This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 23rd of December 1967 and concluded on the 27th of January 1968. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes, and even though things are jumping around a bit, nothing looks too terrible. The story's low point comes with episode 1, hitting 6.8 million viewers. The peak is the story's final episode, hitting a high of 8.3 million. The remaining episodes are all well in or just under the 7 million mark, which is fairly respectable for the time the story was broadcast in. In terms of outside influence, a Radio Times cover always helps, now in colour too. Competition on ITV was once again a mixture of reruns, cartoons, and now the newest show from Gerry Anderson, Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, a personal favourite of mine. The Enemy of the World is a fascinating story too, as it's the only tale of Season 5 to not feature some kind of alien monster as the villain. However, for the longest time, this story was viewed by fans as being quite dull. For 45 years we only had episode 3 available to view, and when you watch this episode alone with no prior or subsequent context, it can come across as a bit off and slow-paced. All of that changed in 2013, when copies of all 6 episodes were located in Nigeria and were subsequently released on DVD. Watching it in full, this story is absolutely fantastic. Great characters, an engaging story, several tense moments, and a star-double performance from Patrick Troughton, playing both the hero and the villain. I highly recommend checking this story out if you haven't seen it yet, the special edition DVD from 2018 being the best way to go. Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.4 million viewers, an ever so slight increase from the Ice Warriors. I think it's important to note that at this halfway point through the season, that it's arguably the most consistent that Doctor Who has ever been ratings-wise so far. No episode has fallen below 6 million viewers or crossed over 9 million, but to hold consistent ratings of around 7 million for several weeks on end is quite a feat. Furthermore, this story would have sent children's imaginations wild, that the man playing the Doctor could also deliver a superb turn as a villain. There is a target book and an audio release, but for me, the best way to experience The Enemy of the World is definitely via watching it on the medium it was made for.
We're going to put you outside, Salamander. No friends, no safety, nothing. You'll run, but they'll catch up with you.
The fifth story from Season 5 is The Web of Fear. Around 40 years after the Tibetan incident, the Yeti return once more, this time in the London Underground, controlled again by the vengeful Great Intelligence. This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 3rd of February 1968 and concluding on the 9th of March. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes, and I think it's pretty obvious to see how the return of the popular Yeti positively affected the story. The last 3 episodes all shoot above 8 million viewers, and even the lowest point of episode 3, well, it's still pulling in 7 million. Episode 6 gets a special mention, as the 8.3 million viewers it brought in helped put Doctor Who back into the top 40 programmes for the first time in a long time, finishing at 36th place. So aside from the Yeti's return, is there any other factors that helped this story? Well, the promotion for this story was extensive. The Radio Times regularly dedicated pages for the story through its 6-week run, and before the story even began, a specially filmed trailer featuring Patrick Troughton talking to the viewers was aired after the conclusion of The Enemy of the World. Now, many stories of Season 5 had special trailers to help promote them, but this was the first to feature the main actor speaking directly to you, the viewer. Competition on ITV remained weak in comparison, and the return of the Yeti so soon only created the peak of hype and interest for this season. I would argue even more so than the Cybermen. And if you want to enjoy this story now, there's a target book, an audio release, and also a DVD, with the missing episode 3 presented as a telesnap reconstruction. All episodes bar episode 1 were believed to be lost for 45 years, but were found in Nigeria at the same time as The Enemy of the World. So now a long hyped up story we can now enjoy as viewers would have seen it back in 1968. Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.6 million viewers. Another small jump up from the previous story, but a consistently rising average is better than a slowly decreasing one. The Yeti, after only 2 appearances, had arguably cemented their status as a classic Doctor Who monster. They wouldn't return to TV again, aside from a cameo in The Five Doctors in 1983, and even now they haven't yet crossed over to the new series. But even though we only have 2 stories to go on, the near-complete Web of Fear serves as a near-perfect example of a late 60s base under siege story, featuring a compelling narrative, great atmosphere and wonderful characters, including the introduction of Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, then a colonel, as played by Nicholas Courtney. A quintessential watch from the Troughton era. Check it out if you can. The 6th and penultimate story from Season 5 is Fury from the Deep. The TARDIS team arrive and get involved with the goings-on of a North Sea gas refinery, where a parasitic seaweed creature is on the move. This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 16th of March 1968 and concluded on the 20th of April. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes, and despite a strong first half, things begin to slip into the latter half of the story. For the first time this season, we have an episode that falls under 6 million viewers, this being episode 5, which hit 5.9 million. So why now at this point in the season are we starting to see more of a substantial drop? The show was now firmly back in a 5:15 time slot, and competition on ITV was varied to say the least. Almost every region was choosing to air a different kind of programme, whether that be in animation, reruns, comedies, silent films, you name it, ITV was probably showing it somewhere. Furthermore, as winter turned into spring, it could be said that more people, particularly children, were more likely to be outside at 5:15 on a Saturday rather than inside watching TV. Furthermore, and this is just a theory, but I think all of the hype and excitement of the Yeti returning could have had a small negative effect on this story. Like with any big event, the immediate aftermath is that things die down, and whilst the first half of Fury retains figures that echo the heights of the Web of Fear, the latter half could be a result of people dropping off, as they were there to see the Yeti, see how the next story went, and maybe just weren't as captivated by the seaweed creature. Having said that, this was another story from Season 5 that was built up as a masterpiece amongst fandom. All 6 episodes are sadly missing from the archives, but in 2020 the entire story was released in animated form, on DVD and Blu-ray, giving new life to this long-missed adventure. Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.2 million viewers, a small drop from the Web of Fear. Don't get me wrong, a 7.2 million average over a 6-week period is still very good and respectable, but this is the first ratings drop in Season 5 when looking at story averages. Whilst you can still enjoy Fury as a Target book and an audio release, I would recommend picking up the animated version to see the story for yourself as close to original broadcast as possible. This story also saw the departure of Deborah Watling's Victoria, in what was quite a heartfelt farewell for the series at the time. But we have one more story left this season, and it would certainly try to end things with a bang. The 7th and final story from Season 5 is The Wheel in Space. Members of the Wheel space station begin noticing some strange goings-on. This is only confirmed by the arrival of the Doctor and Jamie, closely followed by the Cybermen. This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 27th of April, 1968, and concluded on the 1st of June. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes, and things seem a bit more steady, but a special note must go to episode 4, which not only gained the highest ratings for this story, but also the entire season, coming in at 8.6 million. Episode 4 also rocketed into the top 40 programs, finishing in 28th place. The lowest point was the closing episode, which drew in 6.5 million viewers. Now the high peak of episode 4 could be down to time slot shifting. Originally scheduled for 5:25, it instead went out at 6 PM due to coverage of the FA Cup final, and it seems a fair chunk of the football crowd stuck around to see what the Cybermen were up to. Competition on ITV again depended on what region you lived in, but the big finale talking point was once again the return of the Cybermen. Being their 4th appearance in under 2 years, the Cyborgs were fast becoming a big challenger for the Daleks as the most iconic and memorable Doctor Who monster. Whilst the Wheel in Space isn't often revered as one of the Cybermen's best, it does introduce a brand new companion, Zoe Herriot, as played by Wendy Padbury. We only have episodes 3 and 6 of this story left to view, as the remaining 4 parts are currently missing. There's an unnecessarily expensive Target book, an audio release, and the surviving 2 episodes can be viewed on the Lost in Time box set. Part of the story was animated for the streaming service BritBox, with consistent rumours that a full animated version will be released over the next few years. Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.3 million viewers, providing one final small increase for the season. It's not as strong as the previous season's Moonbase, which averaged 8.3 million, but still, to average over 7 million over 6 weeks, particularly after a very long season, is still somewhat impressive. The Cybermen were firmly here to stay in the Doctor Who world. Their fourth appearance may not be the most celebrated, but it is still worth checking out to see how they changed and evolved with every story in which they appeared. Also, with a new companion in tow, the Doctor, Jamie and Zoe were set for more adventures in time and space.
You can't break through the field, you know.
You will be destroyed. Others are coming.
So that's Season 5, the 7 stories that comprise it and the ratings that they garnered. With the transmission of Episode 6 of The Wheel in Space on the 1st of June 1968, Season 5 of Doctor Who was brought to an end. The season ran for 9 months and was made up of 40 episodes across 7 stories. 18 episodes of Season 5 are currently missing from the archives, although many of the stories can be enjoyed via DVD, thanks to animated or telesnap reconstructions. Let's have a look at the story averages for this season. We can see that the highest story average was with The Web of Fear, which had 7.6 million tuning in on average. The lowest point came with the season opener, Tomb of the Cybermen, which averaged 6.8 million, following the trend of the last season opener, The Smugglers, which also performed the lowest, in that case for Season 4. These story averages are arguably the most consistent that Doctor Who has been so far, with no story averaging less than 6 million, but none crossing 8 million either, which is a shame as some of these stories are some of the best examples of classic Who there ever is. But saying that, with roughly 7 million people tuning in for nearly every story, this continued to prove that the monster or base under siege approach to storytelling was really working and resonating with audiences. The introduction of instantly popular new monsters, such as the Ice Warriors and particularly the Yeti, helped expand the roster of villains for the Doctor to face. The double appearance of the Cybermen this season continued to cement their presence as one of the greatest monsters the show has ever devised. But despite all of these new monsters and engaging stories, the weekly work toll was starting to ebb away at the main man himself, Patrick Troughton, and the next season to air would prove to be his last. If we work out the average amount of viewers across the entire season, we can calculate that the average for Season 5 of Doctor Who is around roughly 7.2 million viewers, a very small increase from Season 4's 7.1 million, and if you just take the 7 Troughton stories from that season into account, it's a drop of 0.4 million. So for the past 3 seasons now, Doctor Who was producing an overall average in the 7 million viewer range, which again, in the late 1960s would have been seen as fairly respectable. But considering there was only one major competitor, and a third channel that most people still didn't have access to yet in BBC Two, the heads at the corporation probably thought that their science fiction show could do better. But with a successful baseline approach to introducing new monsters and presenting engaging storylines, they could only hope that Season 6 would provide the big boost in ratings that they so desperately craved. It's the summer of 1968, and after a repeat screening of the Season 4 finale, The Evil of the Daleks, viewers were primed and ready for the new season to begin. The previous set of adventures in Season 5 were very much a tight and controlled bunch. 6 out of the 7 stories were base under siege style affairs, with alien monsters at the source of trouble. The only exception was The Enemy of the World, an excellent story showcasing the acting chops of Patrick Troughton, as he played both the Doctor and the sinister Salamander. New monsters had been introduced and become hits with viewers, the Ice Warriors and the Yeti being the most famous examples of this monster era, as it's been called in retrospect. So with Season 6 about to begin, I'm sure audiences were both excited but also curious as to what they would see next. Would it be another run of new monsters attacking our heroes trapped in some kind of base, or would it be stories showcasing something wildly different? The answer is a little bit of both. But whilst this season had much to offer viewers, it was becoming clearer that the leading man, Patrick Troughton, felt his time on Doctor Who was coming to an end. The weekly workload was really starting to affect him, and sure enough, Season 6 would prove to be his final season. But more on that when we get there. The first story from Season 6 is The Dominators. On the peaceful, pacifist world of Dulcis, the sadistic Dominators, alongside their army of robots, the Quarks, aim to disrupt that peace and to wreak havoc across the entire planet. This story is comprised of 5 episodes, which began airing on the 10th of August 1968 and concluded on the 7th of September. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 5 episodes, and this is far from what I would call a promising start. Whilst episode 4 brings in the peak of this story's viewership at 7.5 million viewers, the rest of the story brings in much less of an audience than you would want for a season opener. 3 of the 5 episodes dip below 6 million, which back in the late 60s was bound to raise some eyebrows at the BBC. However, we must always take into account what could have affected these ratings. First off, The Dominators was unfortunate to be broadcasting right through the summer month of August, a time where nights are lighter and vast quantities of people would be making the most of that sunlight and hot weather, especially at the reasonably early time of 5:15 PM, which was the broadcast slot for this story. Also, the Doctor still managed to help the BBC gain a bigger audience share than its main rival, ITV. The other side had recently had many of its new franchised companies plunged into chaos because of industrial action. This meant that the lineup of new original programming they had set for many regions simply didn't make it to air. With Doctor Who returning and also being an example of new original programming, despite the low numbers we saw, it still claimed a victory for the BBC. The story of the Dominators itself is a mixed bag to say the least, especially when it comes to fan affection. The Quarks were yet another attempt to find a monster that, like the Cybermen, could rival the Daleks in popularity, and I think it's quite obvious to see why that didn't happen. Some call it a hidden gem, some call it a sluggish mess, and the fact it was cut from 6 episodes to 5 often leads people to despair at the fact that this very talky story had the potential to be even more chatty. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.2 million viewers. Now, this isn't the worst average Doctor Who had had by this point, far from it. It's not the major lows of stories such as The Savages or The Smugglers, and as far as season openers go, it still falls in the 6 million bracket, just as Tomb of the Cybermen had done the year before. The important thing was, despite winning against ITV for audience share, as summer turned to autumn, it was the BBC's hope that Doctor Who could really pick up the ratings, rather than continue to lose them. If it did, then with talks of its main actor leaving, it could have been very much in line for the chop. The Dominators is also available to view in full on DVD, and there's a target book and an audio release, but if you have to be selective about which classic Who stories to watch, I would argue that you could miss this one, especially when you consider the story that was to follow.
Shall we destroy? Shall we destroy?
The second story from Season 6 is The Mind Robber. The TARDIS explodes, sending the Doctor, Jamie and Zoe into the mysterious land of fiction, where fictional characters come alive and where quite literally, anything can happen. This story is comprised of 5 episodes, which began airing on the 14th of September 1968 and concluded on the 12th of October. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 5 episodes, and thankfully we can see quite a big improvement from the Dominators. No episode falls below 6 million viewers, and the peak comes with episode 4, which manages to gain an audience of 7.3 million. These figures are much more consistent and reminiscent of the earlier adventures of Season 5, where the numbers aren't necessarily spectacular, but respectable nonetheless. In terms of competition, after recovering from the industrial action that besieged a lot of its regional ITV franchise holders, the other side had one ace up its sleeve, to try and take down Doctor Who. This was the new Supermarionation show from Jerry Anderson, titled Joe 90. Whilst the spy craze popularised by the James Bond films was still sweeping the nation, despite this new challenger's take on that genre, it didn't really do much to take down Doctor Who so much as mildly inconvenience it. It's interesting to note that all 5 episodes of The Mind Robber were only allocated 20-minute time slots, as opposed to the usual 25. The longest episode is just under 22 minutes, and the shortest episode clocking in at bang on 18 minutes. This makes The Mind Robber a fairly quick watch, but it's such a wonderful example of the fantasy element of Doctor Who being pushed to its late 60s limit. Episode 1 in particular, tacked on due to the lost 6th part of The Dominators, is an excellent little drama in itself. Featuring only the regulars and minimal sets, it still manages to keep you hooked the whole time, as do the remaining 4 parts set in the land of fiction. Honestly, one of the best Troughton stories ever, in my opinion, and we're so lucky that all 5 parts exist for us to enjoy, either via DVD, a target book, or as an audio release. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.9 million viewers, a nice 0.7 boost from the season opener, and actually a match to Season 5's second story, The Abominable Snowmen, which also averaged at 6.9 million. A boost is better than a decline, and I suppose the BBC were hoping, just like what had happened in Season 5, that boost would only continue as the UK drew closer to Christmas and the winter season. Now, we do actually have some repeat data for this story. Broadcast in 1992 over 5 weeks on BBC Two, beginning on the 31st of January and concluding on the 28th of February.
And now, another classic episode from 1968 with Patrick Troughton as Doctor Who, wrestling with invisible forces in The Mind Robbers.
Here are those individual viewing figures for that repeat screening, averaging out at 2.33 million viewers. Whilst this may sound incredibly low, keep in mind a few things. For one, this was broadcast during Doctor Who's wilderness years, a time when the original run of the programme had ended, and a lot of popular interest in the show amongst the general public had died down. Secondly, this aired on BBC Two, which very rarely gets the super high figures we see in comparison on BBC One. To back this up, looking at episode 5's ratings, which stand at 3.46 million, in terms of the top list of programmes for BBC Two, this episode placed 10th. So for then a 24-year-old story, it showed that even in repeats, Doctor Who still packed a pretty solid punch. Overall, The Mind Robber is a superb combination of brilliant ideas, some wonderful characters, great performances from the regulars, and something that in Doctor Who's long old history stands out as something truly unique.
Jamie, the doctor!
The third story from Season 6 is The Invasion. Head of International Electromatics Tobias Vaughan is planning for an invasion of Earth, an invasion led by the Cybermen. This story is comprised of 8 episodes, which began airing on the 2nd of November 1968 and concluded on the 21st of December. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 8 episodes, and things are beginning to look much more consistent, just as they began doing as the previous season progressed. The peak is with the opening episode, which drew in 7.3 million viewers, the weakest result being with episode 4, where 6.4 million tuned in. But despite being a mammoth 8-episode long story, the fact that viewing figures have remained this consistent is quite impressive to say the least. The first thing to note with this story is the broadcast date. No, rest assured I didn't get my dates wrong, as there was a 3-week gap from when The Mind Robber ended and the invasion began. This gap was due to coverage of the 1968 Olympic Games, which were taking place that year over in Mexico. But it's nice to see that after a 2-week break, audiences still returned to see the Doctor do battle with the Cybermen once more. Competition on ITV was varied depending on the region, but one show began airing partway through the invasion's broadcast run, and this programme was The Land of the Giants, a show that would later do damage to Doctor Who's ratings. Not only does the invasion showcase the Cybermen in their 5th and final appearance in the 60s era of Doctor Who, but one particular character also returns, Lethbridge Stewart, now promoted to Brigadier. After appearing in The Web of Fear in the previous season, Nicholas Courtney returned once more to play the recently promoted Brigadier, now head of a new organisation, the United Nations Intelligence Task Force, or simply known as UNIT. Behind the scenes, Doctor Who was indeed changing. Those in charge were planning to make the series more Earth-based, and the invasion was almost used as a testing ground for this particular format. The relative success of this tale would go on to inspire the future of Doctor Who for several years to come. But we'll get to that some other time. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.9 million viewers, roughly the same average as the previous story. Whilst in no means a bad average, it's a bit concerning for a few reasons. Despite being a bumper-length adventure, packed with the popular Cybermen and returning the Lethbridge Stewart character, the figures implied that despite all of this, the audience for watching the show was not growing. In the invasion's defence, it does have to calculate its average over 8 episodes instead of the 5 that the previous 2 Season 6 stories had, but the fact that no singular episode surpassed 8 million surely made people at the BBC take notice. In terms of enjoying the invasion today, you can watch it via a DVD release. Episodes 1 and 4 are missing from the archives, but they were animated by the legendary animation studio Cosgrove Hall. There is also a target book and an audio version that you can listen to should you wish. Some people may think it's too long, but for me, the appearance of the Cybermen, the introduction of UNIT, and a top-notch performance from Kevin Stoney as Tobias Vaughan really make this story an entertaining thrill ride from start to finish. The fourth story from Season 6 is The Crotons. The TARDIS team meet the submissive Gond race, who send their brightest off to their beloved rulers and enslavers, the Crotons. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 28th of December 1968 and concluded on the 18th of January 1969. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and wow, this is certainly a jump up. Episode 1 reaches 9 million viewers, which makes it the highest singular rating for any episode of the Patrick Troughton era. Episode 2 pulls in a similarly strong 8.4 million, with viewing figures declining further thereafter, finishing at 7.1 by episode 4. So how come the ratings for the opening episode of this story are up by 2 million from the end of the previous one? Well, the first episode aired on the 28th of December, and the week from Christmas Day to New Year is always a mixed bag for TV. Back in the 60s, not as many people tuned into TV on the big day itself, but the days following it, it's almost like business as usual. But with nights being darker earlier and often colder, it's fairly reasonable that a combination of winter conditions and the holiday spirit helped encourage more people than normal to gather around their sets and watch whatever was on, which happened in this case to be Doctor Who. I know it's just a theory, but the declining figures back to what they were over the weeks into January, I would argue lent some sort of weight to this. The Crotons themselves are monsters that are often ridiculed, whether it's their egg box design or their Brummie or South African sounding accents, and whilst the story might be fairly paint by numbers, I would argue there's still a lot of fun to be had from it. Today it can be enjoyed on DVD, as a Target book, and as an audio release. Overall, this story attracted an average of 8 million viewers, a huge 1.1 increase from The Invasion. This is one of the few Troughton stories to average out in the 8 million range, and that can't be taken away from the Crotons, no matter how much people may dislike it. Sure, it only had 4 episodes to average out instead of The Invasion, which was double the length, but this pickup of overall viewership is what the show consistently needed, to both win the praise of the BBC, but also to avoid that ever-looming television axe. Another interesting notch for the Crotons here is that we have some repeat data for you. In November of 1981, BBC Two began airing the 5 Faces of Doctor Who season of reruns, airing a 4-part story from each Doctor. Now at the time, the Crotons was the only 4-part story that still existed in full in the archives, so whilst many viewers were puzzled as to why out of the many 4-part Troughton stories, this was the one that was picked, it was more out of practicality than arguably popularity. Here are the individual viewing figures and the average ratings for the Crotons repeat, which aired over 4 consecutive days in November of 1981, from Monday the 9th to Thursday the 12th. The story held an average of 4.5 million viewers, which isn't bad considering it was airing on BBC Two. Similarly to the Mind Robbers BBC Two repeat in 1992, this repeat of the Crotons shot all 4 episodes into the top 20 programmes for the channel, with episodes 2 and 3 even cracking the top 10, coming in at 9th place. The Crotons may not be to everyone's taste, they may not be the most exciting or convincing monster, but they have an appeal which still lives on today, and if anything else, they remain a sign of how experimental the show was still willing to be when it came to new and original monsters.
We have reserve power for 27 more minutes. Then we shall exhaust. Our function will end.
The 5th story from Season 6 is The Seeds of Death. Invading a lunar station, the Ice Warriors trouble the time travelers and the human crew by attempting to use the TMAT system to spread their deadly seed pods all over the Earth. This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 25th of January 1969 and concluded on the 1st of March. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes, and we can see things have mostly returned to the levels they were at for The Invasion. Gone are the 8 and 9 million figures from the Crotons, instead we have the low point right at the beginning, with episode 1 bringing in 6.6 million viewers. However, the ratings improve consistently as the story progresses, with the peak in fact being the final episode, which brought in a decent 7.7 million figure. So what helped this story boost its ratings from the 6 to 7 million range? One key factor was the return of the Ice Warriors. The Martians had proven popular in their debut story the previous year, so their return would have definitely generated interest amongst all age groups of the audience. However, despite the story gaining viewership, it still technically had a lower audience share compared to what was being shown on ITV. Land of the Giants was proving to be really popular, and was seen as new and fresh when compared to Doctor Who, which was noticeably cheaper and less flashy, and also now into its 6th season. Furthermore, whilst younger viewers were upset that Patrick Troughton was leaving the part as the news was now public, there was some cause that Doctor Who should end altogether, an outcome that started to look more and more viable as 1969 progressed, especially when the head of drama serials, Sean Sutton, commented at meetings during the Seeds of Death's run that Doctor Who was losing out to its ITV competition. There were still 2 stories of Season 6 to air, and they would have to go a long way into helping Doctor Who secure its future. Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.2 million viewers, a 0.8 drop from the Crotons, but still a very respectable average for a 6-part story. This average is the second highest of the season so far, and the Ice Warriors' return, I would argue, certainly helped this story reach these figures. The Seeds of Death was the very first black and white Doctor Who story to be released on home video, reaching VHS in 1985, but you can now enjoy it, in much better quality, via DVD, or you can read the novelised version of the story, another entry to showcase the Ice Warriors, and one that helped them strengthen their position as an iconic and classic Doctor Who monster.
You'll either be angry if you kill me or I'm a genius.
The 6th and penultimate story from Season 6 is The Space Pirates. The TARDIS crew join up with the Interstellar Space Corps, who are on the trail of some villainous space pirates. This story is comprised of 6 episodes, which began airing on the 8th of March 1969 and concluded on the 12th of April. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 6 episodes, and this is starting not to look so good. We can see that no episode is able to cross the 7 million mark, the peak being episode 2, which drew in 6.8 million viewers. More worrying are the 4 episodes that fall below the 6 million mark, the weakest being episode 6, pulling in 5.3 million. So what on earth happened to see the ratings drop so sharply? Well, the strong competition that ITV had managed to gain with showing the Land of the Giants programme was continuing to make major assaults on Doctor Who's ratings. What had started as a small dent was now becoming more of a gaping hole, with viewing figures continuing to decrease as the months roll on. Furthermore, I think another potential factor could have been the news of Patrick Troughton's departure from the programme. At the time of the Space Pirates broadcast, casting for a 3rd incarnation of the Doctor hadn't yet been announced, and in opinion-based programmes, such as Junior Points of View, one hot topic of discussion was who could replace Troughton, but also exploring the possibility of the show ending altogether. Indeed, there was not yet any official word from the BBC whether this run of adventures for the Doctor would be his last. It was clear that some big decisions were going to have to be made very, very soon. Overall, this story attracted an average of 5.9 million viewers, a staggering 1.3 decrease from the previous story. The fact that 4 of the 6 episodes fell below the 6 million mark definitely contributed to this, and despite boasting some impressive film sequences, perhaps the lack of an alien monster as the main villain didn't help the Space Pirates connect with audiences. That and the fact that the more flashy Land of the Giants was stealing viewers for ITV left, right and centre. In terms of experiencing the Space Pirates today, sadly only episode 2 still remains in the archives. This sole survivor can be viewed on the Lost in Time DVD box set, or can be indulged as a Target book or via an audio release. And whilst this story isn't talked about much in fandom today, from what we know and can see of it, it was a story that fully embraced the futuristic fantasy the show had explored in recent years, and certainly had some very high ambitions. The 7th and final story from Season 6 is the War Games. The time travellers find themselves crossing to and from various wars through Earth's history, and later discover that it's all being arranged and manipulated by the Warlord and the War Chief, the latter being a renegade from the Doctor's own race of people. This story is comprised of 10 episodes, which began airing on the 19th of April 1969 and concluded on the 21st of June. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 10 episodes, and, well, what a sad way to end not just Season 6, not just Patrick Troughton's time as the Doctor, but also the whole black and white era. Episode 2 manages to pull in 6.3 million viewers, the only episode out of this 10-part beast to cross the 6 million mark. 8 of the remaining 9 episodes fly around from numbers as low as 4.1 million, and to scrape the highs of 5.7 million. Episode 8 manages to attain the lowest figures for a single episode of Doctor Who up to this point, managing a very poor 3.5 million result. So how on earth do we dissect this one? Well, first of all, the War Games is a 10-part story. It's hard enough to keep audiences' interest held over 4 weeks, never mind 10, so it almost seemed inevitable that there was going to be some sort of ratings dip along the way. Secondly, the competition on ITV continued to be relentless. Although Land of the Giants was the main rival for Doctor Who in many regions, there were also other glossy American imports that were shown in parts of the country and similarly stealing audience members. These included Tarzan and the TV series adaptation of successful Hollywood film Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Finally, almost like the last little damning nail in the coffin, this story broadcast between April and June into the summer season, a typical time that, as we've learnt, generally has less people sat at home watching their TVs at 5:15 on a Saturday. It's a shame that initial ratings for this story were so low, because it's arguably one of the greatest Troughton stories and greatest stories in all of Doctor Who to be broadcast. The idea of different war zones is fascinating to me, and the manipulative schemes behind it are similarly interesting to dissect. But this story is most renowned for introducing us, after nearly 6 years, to who the Doctor really is. Well, sort of. We learn for the first time that he is a Time Lord, a race of beings who prefer their kind not to interfere with other peoples and planets. From the first moments of meeting him back in An Unearthly Child, the Doctor had chosen to leave his home and people to seek a life of exploration, a chance to go out and see the universe rather than just observe it. It's early days for the Time Lord mythos of the show at this point, but it's still a fascinating glimpse as to what we would come to learn about the Time Lords, their home, their society, and their most famous child, the Doctor. To enjoy the War Games today, you can enjoy it via DVD, via a Target novel, and via an audio release. Overall, this story attracted an average of 4.9 million viewers, a further 1 million decrease from the previous story. And I hate to say it, but not only is this the only Troughton story to have an average of less than 5 million, but that also makes it the lowest Troughton story overall in terms of ratings. It's such a shame because the War Games is a tightly crafted masterpiece. I know it has its critics, and a 10-part story definitely makes it a challenge for some to watch and make it all the way through, but there is so much to love and admire here, not least the introduction of the Doctor's species. Finally, we learn a little bit about our enigmatic hero, just why he ran away from home, and what was going to be his punishment. After saying farewell to Jamie and Zoe, the Time Lords spark the Doctor's second regeneration, with his punishment being an exile to Earth in the 20th century, the knowledge of time travel taken away from him. And days before episode 10 went to air, Jon Pertwee was revealed to be the actor chosen to portray the third incarnation of the Doctor. The show would not return in the autumn, instead in January of 1970. It would help spearhead BBC One's upcoming colour service and introduce us not only to a new Doctor, but a whole new format for the programme itself. But we must not forget the cosmic hobo, the man who proved the Doctor could be played by another actor, the man who delivered such a charming yet calculated performance, the man whose interpretation would go on in some way to inspire every subsequent actor to follow, the man who definitively was the Doctor.
Stop! You're making me giddy! No! You can't do this to me! No!
So that's Season 6, the 7 stories that comprise it and the ratings that they garnered. With the transmission of Episode 10 of the War Games on the 21st of June 1969, Season 6 of Doctor Who was brought to an end. The season ran for over 10 months and was made up of 44 episodes across 7 stories. This season is much more intact than Troughton's first 2, with only 7 out of 44 episodes missing from the BBC archives. The 2 missing parts of the invasion have been animated for its DVD release, and there's always talk of the Space Pirates being animated in full sometime in the future. Let's have a look at the story averages for this season. We can see that the highest story average was with the Crotons, which had 8 million viewers. The lowest point came with the season finale, the War Games, which averaged at 4.9 million. These story averages are all over the place compared to the consistency of Season 5. Multiple factors do contribute to this, however. The introduction of some seriously strong competition on ITV, the uncertainty of the show's future turning some people off, some stories not connecting as well, and in an odd way, we're seeing exactly what happened with William Hartnell's final full season of adventures. Could it be that as time goes on, the public just become less enamoured with Doctor Who? Well, we'll have to see if that theory holds up when we look at the eras of future Doctors. If we work out the average amount of viewers across the entire season, we can calculate that the average for Season 6 of Doctor Who is around 6.6 million viewers, which is a 0.6 million drop from Season 5's overall average, and actually is the lowest average for any Doctor Who season up until this point. It's quite a shame when you put it like that, because Season 6 does truly hold some real gems. Whether it's the fantasy of the Mind Robber, the earthbound grittiness of the invasion, or the madness of the War Games, I would argue that there is a lot to love and certainly something for everyone. But since this does bring us to the end of the Second Doctor's era, I think it's time we look back to put all of his ratings into perspective. Let's now have a look at the season averages during the Patrick Troughton era of Doctor Who. Season 4 reigns supreme with a 7.5 million average, and Season 5 is close behind with 7.2 million. Season 6 take last place with 6.6 million. For the Season 4 figure, I'm only counting the time from when Patrick Troughton took over as the Doctor, going from the Power of the Daleks onwards. There's not even a million between these 3 figures, and really, if different stories had been in different seasons, it really makes you wonder if a different season could have taken the top spot. But now let's get really nerdy with numbers and work out the entire average for the second Doctor's tenure. Taking the averages for seasons 4, 5 and 6, we can calculate that the average ratings for the Patrick Troughton era of Doctor Who stand at around 7.1 million viewers. Considering this encompasses well over 100 individual episodes in a 3-year period, I would argue this is still a very respectable figure for the era. The second Doctor's time was filled with monsters, both old and new, lots of fast-paced, exciting base under siege stories, and a leading performance that never failed to be boring, never failed to get stale, never failed to make us smile, and keep a fair chunk of people coming back week after week after week. To get even more nerdy with numbers, just for fun, let's compare the average ratings between the first two Doctors. We can see that Hartnell reigns victorious with an era average of around 7.9 million, a 0.8 lead above Troughton. But let's not forget, Hartnell had had several of his stories average above the 10 million mark. Unfortunately for Troughton, not a single story of his could boast the same achievement. The closest was the Moonbase from season 4, which managed to reach an average of 8.3 million. But let's add these two Doctors' averages together, so that we can calculate the average ratings for the black and white era of Doctor Who stand at around 7.5 million viewers. After 6 years and over 250 individual episodes, for Doctor Who to overall average at 7.5 million is certainly impressive. At a time when TV shows could have had very short lives on air, it's reassuring to see that what started off as a children's sci-fi show ended up becoming a staple of Saturday tea time viewing for both children and adults. Doctor Who had its future secure. It was to return in colour, and with a brand new Doctor to lead into a brand new decade. And there you have it, Doctor Who's ratings journey throughout the 1960s. Even in the show's days in monochrome, there are numerous high and low points, from the very humble beginnings in 1963 to the staggering heights of the Dalek Mania years, and then to the low points seen towards the end of both the first and second Doctor's tenures. But viewing figures aside, one aspect is clear. Doctor Who was unique as a programme. It had survived changes that other shows would have crumbled under, and it would be such a change that would carry it into the 1970s. But that story's for another time. In the meantime, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this series, be sure to leave a like, a comment down below, share the video around, and subscribe to us here at AMTV Who, as we'd love to have you aboard. In the meantime, I've been Adam Martin from AMTV Who. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.